She laughed at my cheap watch in front of 300 people, tapped one manicured nail against the glass, and announced to the entire ballroom that it looked like something scraped off the bottom of a gas station clearance bin. The crowd howled, champagne glasses tilted. Somewhere a string quartet kept playing like nothing had happened, because to them nothing had. Just the banker's daughter putting a poor man in his place. I looked down at the scuffed steel on my wrist, the dull face, the strap worn soft from years of being touched, and I let out a single, quiet breath. Then, I did the one thing nobody in that room expected. I smiled, set down my untouched glass of their $40,000 vintage, and walked out without saying a word. Because here's the part Clara Sterling did not know, the part not a single laughing guest in that gilded mausoleum of a ballroom could have guessed. That watch she called garbage, that piece of scrap she mocked until her friends were wheezing, was the only physical decryption key in existence to her own father's vault. The vault that held everything. Not just money, everything. The controlling shares of the Sterling Group, the real will, the evidence that could bury half the people clapping at her joke. Her father, Frederick Sterling, the old lion of the financial district, had pressed it into my hand himself 8 months ago with a grip that was already starting to tremble. And he had said to me, in that gravel voice of his, "Ethan, you are the last honest man I know. When the wolves come for my house, and they will come, this is the door they cannot open. Keep it. Guard it. Do not let them charm it off you." So I kept it. And tonight his daughter called it trash and threw her head back and laughed. Oh, sweetheart, you have absolutely no idea what you just did. Let me back up, because if I do not, you will think I am the kind of man who shows up to a black tie gala looking for a fight. I am not. My name is Ethan Reed. I am 31 years old, and until about a year ago, the most exciting thing in my life was the smell of oil and brass in the back room of a watch repair shop I ran on a quiet street where the rent had not been raised out of mercy rather than economics. I fixed watches, grandfather clocks, cheap quartz, the occasional heirloom somebody's dead relative left them that they could not bear to let stop ticking. I was good at it, precise, patient. The kind of patient that most people mistake for weakness, right up until the second it costs them. I did not grow up rich. I grew up in a 2-room apartment above a laundromat, with a mother who worked doubles and a father who left the way morning fog leaves, quietly and without explanation. I learned early that people who have money look at people who do not the way you look at furniture, which is to say, only when it is in their way. So I have no illusions about the Clara Ashfords of the world. I have been furniture my whole life. What I did not expect was for one of those people, the richest and coldest of them all, to walk into my little shop on a rainy Tuesday and change the entire course of my existence. But that comes later. First, let me finish walking out of this ballroom, because the walk itself is a small pleasure I intend to savor. The Sterling estate on the night of the winter benefit was a thing designed to make ordinary people feel small. Marble the color of old bone. Chandeliers dripping down from a ceiling painted with fat cherubs, who all looked vaguely disappointed in the guests below them. A staircase so wide, you could have marched a cavalry regiment down it, and 300 of the most important, most self-important people in the city, all of them draped in fabric that cost more than cars, all of them performing wealth at each other like it was an Olympic sport. I had been invited for exactly one reason, and it was not my sparkling personality. It was because old Frederick had put my name on the list personally, in his own shaking hand, and nobody at the Sterling Group had dared to strike it off. Not yet. I had been standing near a column, minding my own business, sipping water because I do not drink at events where I might need my wits, when Clara found me. She did not find me by accident. She found me the way a shark finds a swimmer, drawn by the scent of something that did not belong. She was, I will admit, breathtaking. That is the cruelest part about people like her. God does not hand out that kind of face to the kind and gentle. He hands it to the ones who will use it as a weapon. Ink-black hair swept up to show a neck built for diamonds. A gown the deep red of arterial blood. Eyes the exact temperature of the inside of a freezer. She glided up to me with 2 of her friends flanking her like attack dogs in couture, and she looked me up and down with the slow, deliberate disgust of a woman inspecting a stain. "You," she said, and even the single syllable had money in it. "You're the little clock man my father keeps around. Ethan, is it?" She said my name like she was picking it up with tweezers. "Ethan Reed," I said, "and it's watches mostly. Clocks are a hobby." Her friends giggled as though I had said something unbearably quaint. Clara's gaze dropped from my face, down my off-the-rack suit, which was clean and pressed and cost me a month of profits, and landed on my wrist. On the watch. And that was when the show began. "Oh my God," she breathed, and her voice carried, which meant she wanted it to. "What is that? Is that a watch? Is that supposed to be a watch?" She reached out and took my wrist without asking, turning it in the chandelier light like she was appraising a dead fish. I've seen better on the arms of men selling counterfeit handbags out of a duffel. "Girls, look! Look at this!" Heads turned. Conversations paused. She had that gift, the gift of the born predator. The ability to make a room go quiet just by wanting it to. "My father lets this into our home. This watch. This little, sad, tragic little watch." She tapped the glass with her nail. Tick, tick, and every tap felt like she was knocking on a door she had no idea led somewhere she would one day be desperate to enter. "How much did this cost, clockman? $20? Was it free? Did it come inside a cereal box?" The laughter spread outward from her in a ripple. I watched it move across the ballroom, face after face lighting up with the particular joy that comfortable people feel when they get to feel superior to someone for free. Owen Hayes, her fiancé, appeared at her shoulder wearing a smirk you could have hung a coat on. Owen, whose own watch cost more than my building, who had inherited everything and earned nothing, who looked at me the way you look at a bug you have already decided to step on. "Careful, Liz," he drawled, loud enough for the audience. "You'll catch something touching it." I stood there, wrists still in her cold fingers, and I let them have it. All of it. The laughter, the sneers, the delicious cruelty of the strong toward the weak. I did not pull away. I did not defend myself. I did not explain. Because there is a specific kind of power, a rare and quiet kind, in knowing something the people laughing at you do not know. It is the power of the man holding the winning card while everyone at the table mocks his empty hands. I looked at Clara Sterling, at that gorgeous glacier of a face, and inside my head, where no one could hear it, I thought, "You are laughing at the only key to your father's kingdom, and one day, not far from now, you are going to call me and beg, and I am going to let you." "Are you even going to say anything?" she demanded, finally letting my wrist drop like it disgusted her. "God, you don't even have the spine to be embarrassed. Just take your little cereal box watch and go stand somewhere I can't see it." "Of course," I said. My voice was perfectly calm, and I saw a flicker of something cross her eyes at that, a small confusion, because the poor are supposed to stammer. The poor are supposed to flush and shrink. I did neither. I inclined my head, polite as a butler. "Thank you for a memorable evening, Miss Sterling. Give my regards to your father. Tell him the clockman says hello." And I walked out. Past the sniggering guests, past the cherubs on the ceiling who no longer looked disappointed, but something closer to knowing. Past a waiter who caught my eye and gave me the smallest, most human nod, one working man to another. Out the enormous doors, down the cavalry staircase, into the cold, clean bite of the winter night, where I stopped on the gravel drive, tilted my head back, and laughed. Not the way she had laughed, sharp and cruel. I laughed the way you laugh when the universe has quietly handed you the last word and asked you to hold it a little longer before you use it. Behind me, in the warm and golden ballroom, Clara Sterling turned to Owen and said, "What an odd little man," and thought no more about me for exactly 111 days. I know the number because I counted. It is a good number. It is the number of days between the night she called my watch garbage and the morning she stood in front of her father's vault, shaking, with a phone pressed to her ear, listening to it ring. But I am getting ahead of myself again. Let me tell you about the watch. Let me tell you about the old man. Let me tell you how a clock repairman ended up holding the keys to a kingdom. It started on a rainy Tuesday, 13 months before the gala, in the back room of my shop. The bell over my door rang the way it always did, a thin, tired chime I kept meaning to replace and never did, and I called out that I would be right there because I had a movement half disassembled on the bench and 47 tiny screws that would cost me an afternoon if I let them scatter. When I came out, wiping my hands on a rag, there was an old man standing in the middle of my shop, dripping rain onto my floor, and everything about him was wrong for the room. His coat was wool that whispered money. His shoes were handmade. And his eyes, when they found me, had the particular exhausted heaviness of a man who has spent decades being the smartest and richest person in every room and has found it profoundly, bone-deeply lonely. I did not know he was Frederick Sterling. Not yet. To me, he was just an old man in an expensive coat with a watch he wanted fixed, and I treated him the way I treated everyone, which is to say, like a human being who had walked in out of the rain. I got him a chair, I got him a towel, and a cup of the terrible coffee I kept on a hot plate in the back. He watched me do all of this with an expression I could not read, and when he finally spoke, his voice was gravel and iron. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Not arrogant, genuinely curious. "A man with a wet coat and, I'm guessing, a watch that stopped," I said. "Beyond that, no. Should I?" Something happened in his face then, a crack in the granite. He almost smiled. "No," he said quietly, and there was a whole world of tiredness in that one word. "No, you shouldn't." That's rather the point. He reached into his coat and drew out a watch and set it on my counter, and I forgot entirely about the man because the object stole every ounce of my attention. It was, on the surface, nothing. Steel case, worn, a plain dark face, no maker's mark I recognized, no jewels, no gold, nothing that would make a collector's pulse jump. It looked, honestly, cheap. It looked like exactly the kind of watch a woman in a blood-red gown would one day mock in front of 300 people. But I have had my hands inside watches since I was 14 years old, and I have developed something like a sixth sense, a tingle in the fingertips, and the moment I picked this one up, the tingle became a shout. Because it was heavy. Too heavy. The weight was wrong for the size, wrong for the materials, and when I held it to my ear and heard it tick, the tick was wrong too. Not the clean sweep of a mechanical movement. Something layered underneath it. Something humming. "This isn't just a watch," I said slowly, turning it in my fingers. "What is this?" The old man leaned forward. "Can you open it?" "I can open anything with a back." I found the seam, seated my thinnest case knife, and with a pressure I have spent 17 years learning to control exactly, I popped the case back. And then I went very still. Because what was inside was not a movement. Or it was a movement, a beautiful old hand-wound movement, but it had been built around something else. Nested into the architecture of the gears was a component I had no name for, a dense little core of circuitry and crystal, machined to a tolerance that made my breath catch, integrated so perfectly that removing it would destroy the watch, and destroying the watch would, I understood instinctively, destroy whatever this thing was for. "That," said the old man, "took 4 of the best engineers in the world 11 months to build. It cannot be copied. It cannot be reverse engineered without physically taking it apart, and taking it apart erases it. It is, in the most literal sense, one of one. And it is the only thing on this earth that can open a certain door." He looked at me with those heavy eyes. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand that a very rich, very frightened man just walked into a watch shop in the rain," I said, "and I understand that you didn't come here to have this fixed. It isn't broken." He laughed then, a real laugh, rusty from disuse. "No," he said, "it isn't broken. I came here because for the last 3 weeks, I've been watching you, and before that I spent 2 months having a man I trust watch you. Ethan Reed, 30 years old, no debts you don't pay, no vices worth mentioning, returned a wallet with $800 in it to a customer who would never have known you had it, gives away repairs to old women who can't afford them, and marks it in your books as charity unrecoverable, as if you owe the world an accounting." He leaned back. "Do you know how rare you are? Do you have the slightest idea? I am 74 years old. I have built one of the largest private financial institutions in this country from nothing. And in 50 years of doing it, I have met perhaps 3 people I would trust to hold my coat, let alone my life. My own daughter would sell my grave for the marble. My brother has been trying to have me declared incompetent for a decade. My future son-in-law smiles at me with teeth I count every time, to make sure they're all still there and none are in my back. And then, on a whim, following an instinct I could not explain, I sent a man to watch a clock repairman. And the clock repairman turned out to be the most honest human being I have encountered in half a century." I did not know what to say to that, so I said the true thing, which is usually the safest. "Mr. I still don't know your name." "Sterling," he said. "Frederick Sterling." And even a man who fixes watches for a living knows that name. Sterling Group. Sterling Trust. The building downtown with the name in letters 10 feet tall, throwing its shadow over an entire district. I set the watch down very carefully, the way you set down something you have just realized is a live grenade. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I think you have the wrong man. I fix watches. I don't... Whatever this is, I'm not the person for it." "You are precisely the person for it," he said. "You are the person for it because you just tried to give it back. Do you know how many men, offered a taste of what I'm about to offer you, would have already started calculating? You set it down. You told me I had the wrong man. You have no idea, none, how badly you have just confirmed you're the right one." He stood, slowly, an old lion getting his legs under him. I am not asking for your answer today. I am asking you to have dinner with me. One dinner. Hear an old man out. And if at the end of it, you still want nothing to do with any of it, you will walk away with a very generous payment for a repair you didn't make, and I will never trouble you again. He picked the watch back up and, to my surprise, held it out to me. Hold on to this until then. Consider it a deposit on your time. I should have said no. Every sensible instinct I had was screaming it. Rich men do not walk into the lives of poor men to make them richer. They walk in to use them and leave them emptier than they found them. But there was something in that old man's face, some terrible loneliness, some plea underneath the iron, and I have never in my life been able to walk away from something that is broken and asking quietly to be fixed. So I took the watch, and that, right there, that single moment, a man taking a heavy watch from another man's outstretched hand in a rain-wet shop, was the moment my furniture life ended and everything else began. Dinner was at his estate, the same estate where, 13 months later, his daughter would laugh at the very object now sitting in my palm. But that first night, I did not meet Clara. I met the old man, alone, in a study lined floor to ceiling with books he had actually read. And over a meal I was too nervous to taste, he told me the truth about his empire. And the truth was this. It was rotting from the inside, and everyone circling it knew the old lion was dying, and the moment he was gone, they intended to tear it, and each other, to pieces. His health was failing. His heart, specifically, a matter of months, the doctor said, a year if he was lucky and stubborn, and Frederick Sterling was nothing if not stubborn. He had built the Sterling Group into a fortress, but every fortress has a throne room, and in the throne room, he had built the vault. Not a metaphor, an actual vault, physical and digital both, buried beneath the Sterling building, and inside it were the three things that would decide the fate of everything. First, the controlling shares of the entire enterprise, held not by any individual, but by the vault itself, under a structure so labyrinthine that his lawyers still argued about it. Whoever opened the vault controlled the company, full stop. Second, his true and final will, the real one, not the decoy the family thought was final, the one that would detonate several people's expectations like a bomb. And third, and this was the part that made the old man's voice drop to almost nothing, the evidence. Documents, recordings, a career's worth of quiet insurance he had gathered against the people closest to him. Proof of the things his brother had done, the things his daughter's fiancé was doing, the rot he had watched grow and let grow, because a man cannot cut off his own hands, even when they turn against him. And it all sits behind one door, he said, a door with two locks. The digital lock I can manage from anywhere, codes, biometrics, the usual theater. But the second lock is physical, and it is analog on purpose, because you cannot hack a thing that has no network. You cannot bribe a thing that is not connected to anything. You cannot fool it with a photograph or a recording or a corpse's fingerprint. It is a key. The key is inside that watch, and there is exactly one of it in the world. He looked at me across the ruins of a dinner neither of us had really eaten. I need someone to hold that key who cannot be bought, cannot be charmed, cannot be frightened, and ideally, someone no one would ever think to look at. Someone invisible. Someone the wolves would laugh at rather than fear. A ghost of that rusty smile. A clockman in an off-the-rack suit. Ethan, I am asking you to be the door my family cannot open until I am ready for them to. I am asking you to hold my kingdom in a cheap steel watch and let the whole world underestimate you while you do it. Will you? And God help me, I said yes. I want to be honest with you, because this whole story is about honesty. About a man who was chosen for it and a woman who threw it away with both hands. I did not say yes for the money, although he insisted on paying me, and the number he named would have kept my shop open for 100 years. I said yes because a dying man with everything looked at a man with nothing and saw correctly the one thing he needed, and no one had ever looked at me and seen anything but furniture before. When someone finally sees you, really sees you, and what they see is your worth, you would be astonished what you will agree to carry. So I carried it. For 13 months, I wore a several $100 million decision on my wrist, and fixed quartz movements for pensioners, and let the world go on thinking I was nothing. Frederick and I met, quietly, once a week. Sometimes at the shop after hours, sometimes at the estate through a side entrance the staff had been told to forget. He taught me things. About the company, about the players, about his brother Marcus, all appetite and no spine, who had spent 30 years feeling cheated out of a birthright he had never had the talent to deserve. About Owen Hayes, the fiancé, handsome and hollow, whose family fortune was a beautifully painted facade over a pit of debt, and who was courting Clara for exactly one reason: proximity to the vault. And about Clara herself. That was the strange part. That was the part I did not expect. Because when Frederick talked about his daughter, the iron in him cracked every single time. She wasn't always like this, he told me once, late, when the whiskey he was not supposed to drink had loosened something. She was a warm child, funny, fierce. She used to sit under my desk while I worked and hand me the wrong papers on purpose, just to make me laugh. He turned his glass in his hand. Her mother died when she was 11, and I, being the great Frederick Sterling, being a genius at everything except the only thing that mattered, I did what I knew how to do. I gave her things. I gave her money and schools and a life so padded she never once landed hard enough to learn how to stand back up. I taught her, without ever meaning to, that people are instruments, and warmth is weakness, and the only safe thing to be in this world is cold. I made her. His voice broke, just slightly, just enough. The woman my daughter has become, the cruelty in her, the ice. I am the sculptor of it, Ethan. Every cold inch. And now I am dying, and I do not know how to give her back the one thing I spent 20 years taking away, which is the ability to know a good thing when it is standing right in front of her. He looked at me. That is the real reason for the vault. That is the real reason for you. The money is nothing. The company is nothing. What I want, what I am buying with my last months of scheming, is one chance. One. For my daughter to learn what things are actually worth before it is too late for her to matter. And you, my honest clockman, you are the lesson. She will look at you and see garbage. And one day, she will need you more than she has ever needed anything. And she will have to request with the fact that she could not tell gold from tin. I am sorry to make you the lesson, but you are the only teacher I trust. I did not fully understand him then. I understood the mechanics. Hold the watch, guard the door, wait. I did not understand the heart of it, that a father was using his own death to try, one last time, to teach his daughter to be human. I understood it later. I understood it completely on day 111 when she called. But between the rainy Tuesday and the phone call, there was a war. A quiet one, fought in boardrooms and back channels and whispered conversations. And I was in the middle of it whether I liked it or not, because the wolves had started to smell the blood before the old lion had even fallen. And the first time I truly felt their teeth was 3 weeks before the gala, at a shareholders' reception, when Owen Hayes decided to have a little fun with the clockman, and learned, in front of witnesses, that the clockman had teeth of his own. The shareholders' reception was held in the atrium of the Sterling building, under that 10-foot name in brushed steel, and I was there because Frederick had insisted on it. I want you in the room, he had told me. I want the ones who matter to see your face and dismiss it. A weapon works best when the enemy has already decided it isn't one. So I put on my clean, cheap suit and my heavy, secret watch, and I walked into a sea of people who had more money than the treasuries of small nations, and I stood near the wall and drank water and watched. Frederick was there, seated, because standing for long had become difficult, and he refused to let anyone see it. He held court from a chair the way emperors used to, and the powerful came to him one by one to pay their respects, and I watched the performance of it, the smiles that did not reach the eyes, the handshakes measured to the ounce. And I watched the wolves. Marcus Sterling, the brother, a soft, heavy man with his siblings' features arranged into something weaker and greedier, laughing too loud at his own jokes, his eyes flicking constantly to Frederick to gauge how much longer the throne would be occupied. And Owen Hayes, gliding through the crowd with Clara on his arm like a matched set of expensive accessories, both of them radiating the serene confidence of people who have never once been told no by anyone who mattered. It was Owen who found me. Clara had drifted off to be admired by a cluster of women who all wanted to be her, and Owen, bored, scanning the room for entertainment, the way a cat scans a yard for something small to torment, landed on me. I saw the exact moment he decided. I have seen it 1,000 times. The little brightening, the scenting of easy prey. Well, he said, sauntering over, a glass of something amber in his hand. If it isn't the help. Tell me, did the old man hire you to wind his clocks, or do you just wander into rooms you can't afford and hope no one notices? He looked me up and down with theatrical distaste, playing to the 2 associates trailing behind him, junior sharks learning from a bigger one. That suit, my God, does it come with a receipt so you can return it when the evening's over? His associates chuckled on cue. I looked at Owen Hayes, at his beautiful, hollow face, and I felt the specific calm that comes over me in moments like this. The calm of a man standing on solid ground, watching another man dance on ice he does not know is thin. "Mr. Hayes," I said pleasantly, "I fix watches. Yours, for instance." I nodded at his wrist, where a slab of gold and diamonds announced his net worth to anyone within 20 feet. "That's a lovely piece. May I?" He was so surprised by the request, so unused to the furniture speaking, that he actually extended his wrist, the reflex of a man accustomed to being admired. I took it, the way Clara would one day take mine, and I turned it in the light, and I made a small sound. A knowing sound. A concerned sound. "What?" Owen said. "What's that noise?" "Nothing," I said. "It's just, well, you paid full price for this, I assume? Through the boutique, not a private dealer?" I let a beat of silence do its work. "It's only that the rotor's been swapped. See how it sits, a hair heavy on the turn? Factory would never let that leave the bench. Someone opened this up, replaced the movement, and closed it again. It's a very good fake, or a very good original that's had a very cheap heart put in it. Either way, the man who sold it to you knew." I released his wrist and gave him a small, sympathetic smile. "But I'm sure it keeps perfect time. Most people never check." It was, I will confess, at least partly a bluff. I had heard something genuinely off in the tick, a real irregularity, but the rest I built on the foundations of his face, which had gone, over the course of my little speech, from amused to uncertain to a specific pale shade of fury. Because here's a truth about men like Owen Hayes: their entire self is a surface, and the one unbearable thing, the thing they cannot survive, is the suggestion that the surface is flawed, that they were fooled, that someone got the better of them and they were too foolish to notice. I had just suggested, in front of witnesses, that his most conspicuous symbol of status was a lie, and that he had been too stupid to know it. And I had done it while smiling, while doing him a favor. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had lost its silk. "You're absolutely right," I said warmly. "I'm just the clock man. What would I know?" And I stepped back to the wall and picked my water up again, and left him standing there in the middle of the reception, discreetly turning his own wrist over, staring at his watch, the seed of doubt planted, and already sending down roots. His associates had stopped chuckling. One of them was looking at the watch too, and Owen Hayes, who had approached me to feel large, walked away feeling, for the first time in his gilded life, uncertain. He would spend the next 3 days having that watch examined by 4 separate specialists, and 2 of them, eager to please a rich client and unwilling to contradict a suspicion he had clearly already formed, would tell him exactly what he was afraid to hear. He never wore it again. I count that as a small, early, private victory, the first tooth I showed. There would be more. But the thing about showing a wolf your teeth is that it stops seeing you as furniture and starts seeing you as a rival. And rivals get investigated. That night was the night Owen Hayes first asked the question that would eventually undo him. Who, exactly, is the clock man? And the answer, when he finally started digging for it, would lead him in circles, because Frederick had built my invisibility carefully. But the digging itself changed things. It put me on the board. And once you are on the board, sooner or later, someone tries to take you off it. Let me tell you what the wolves were doing while I fixed watches and waited, because a war has 2 sides, and you should see theirs. Marcus Sterling had wanted his brother's company for 30 years. Not because he could run it. He could not have run a lemonade stand without embezzling from it. He wanted it because it had always been dangled just out of his reach, because their father had looked at 2 sons and chosen one. And Marcus had spent 3 decades marinating in the particular poison of a man who believes he was robbed of a greatness he never actually possessed. As Frederick's health declined, Marcus had grown bold. He had been quietly courting board members, buying loyalty with promises he had no standing to keep, positioning himself as the safe pair of hands for when the old man finally fell. And he had found, in Owen Hayes, a natural ally, because Owen needed the vault, and Marcus needed a puppet who could get close to it, and the 2 of them had struck the kind of bargain that vipers strike, each fully intending to devour the other the moment the meal was served. Their plan, such as it was, had 3 parts. First, get Owen married to Clara, binding the Hayes name to the Sterling fortune and giving Owen a legal claim to sink his hands into. Second, when Frederick died, move fast. Use the chaos and the grief and the confusion to seize operational control before anyone could gather their wits to stop them. And third, open the vault, because both of them believed, correctly, that whoever opened the vault controlled everything, And both of them believed, incorrectly, that opening it would be a matter of codes and lawyers and pressure applied to the right people. Neither of them knew about the second lock. Neither of them knew about the key. Neither. Both of them knew that the whole time they schemed, the entire weight of their ambition rested, invisibly, on the wrist of a man they had decided was garbage. That is the beauty of what Frederick built. The wolves were planning to storm a castle, and they did not know the drawbridge was in the coat pocket of the servant they kept insulting. Clara knew even less. And this is the part I have thought about most, in the long time since, the part that matters if you want to understand how this story ends. Clara was not, at her core, one of the wolves. She was something sadder. She was a woman who had been raised so carefully cold that she had lost the instrument you use to detect warmth in others. And so she was being played by Owen and did not know it. Being maneuvered by her uncle and did not know it. Sleepwalking toward a marriage of pure convenience and calling it a life. She thought she was the huntress. She had no idea she was the bait in someone else's trap. Her father saw all of it and could not tell her. Because a father who has spent 20 years teaching his daughter that love is weakness cannot, in his final months, simply announce that he was wrong and expect the lesson to land. Some lessons cannot be told. They can only be learned, the hard way, on a specific morning in front of a specific locked door. I met her properly for the first time, if you can call it meeting, at the gala, the night she laughed at the watch. But I had seen her before, from a distance, through Frederick's eyes. He kept a photograph on his desk, an old one, a girl of 10 or 11 with her father's fierce eyes and a gap-toothed grin and an expression of such open, fearless delight that it was almost impossible to connect it with the glacier in the blood-red gown. "That's her," he had told me once, catching me looking. "That's who's still in there. That's who I'm trying to reach." I had not believed him. I had looked at that photo of a laughing child and then thought of the stories he told, of the cruelty and the ice, and I had privately concluded that the old man was fooling himself, that the child was gone, that some people simply become the thing they've been shaped into, and there is no reaching them. I was wrong about that. But it would take a dead father, an open door, and a phone call on day 111 to prove it. The gala came a month after the reception. By then, Owen's investigators had been sniffing around the edges of my life for weeks, and had found, to their frustration, almost nothing. A watch shop. A modest apartment. No connection to the Sterling Group on any document. No salary, no title, nothing but a name on a guest list in the old man's hand. Owen had concluded I was a curiosity, a charity case, a lonely old man's pet, and had mostly lost interest. Which was exactly what Frederick had designed. But Clara, at the gala, seeing me stand near my column in my cheap suit, had felt the specific itch that the cruel feel around the meek, and had come to scratch it. And she had scratched it in front of 300 people, and I had let her. And I had walked out into the winter night and laughed. And the countdown began. I did not see Frederick for 8 days after the gala. When I finally did, at the shop, after hours, the change in him frightened me. He had aged a decade in a week. His hands shook badly now, all the time, and there was a gray tint to his skin that I had seen before, on my mother, near the end. He lowered himself into the chair I kept for him with the careful concentration of a man who no longer trusts his own body, and he looked at me, and he said, "I heard about the gala. I heard what she did." His voice was very quiet. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm sorry my daughter is who I made her." "It was just a watch," I said. "She doesn't know what it is." "No," he agreed. "She doesn't know what anything is. That's the tragedy I built." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "It's close now. Weeks. The doctors have stopped pretending otherwise, and I've stopped letting them." He reached into his coat, the same gesture from that first rainy Tuesday, and this time he drew out an envelope, thick, cream-colored, sealed with actual wax. "I need to walk you through what happens, because when I am gone, it is going to move fast, and you are going to be alone in the middle of it, and everyone in that family is going to want the thing on your wrist, and some of them are going to be willing to do frightening things to get it. I need you ready." He set the envelope on my counter next to the watch, the two objects side by side, the key and the instructions. "So listen to me carefully, clock man. Let me tell you exactly how the wolves will come and exactly what you are going to do when they do." And he told me, and 3 weeks later, he was dead, and everything he predicted came true, in order, like a prophecy, like a clock striking hours he had wound long in advance. "Here is how it will go," Frederick said that night in my shop, and his voice had steadied the way a man's voice does when he stops fearing the future and starts arranging it. The moment I die, my brother Marcus will move on the company. He has spent years buying the loyalty of weak men on my board, and the instant I am cold, he will call an emergency session and install himself as acting chairman under some fiction of continuity. He will win that vote, because I have allowed him to think he can, because a wolf who believes he is winning is a wolf who moves carelessly. He tapped the wax-sealed envelope. Let him. It changes nothing. Acting chairman of a company is a paper crown if he cannot control the shares, and the shares are in the vault, and the vault does not open for paper. And Owen? I asked. Owen will marry my daughter, or try to, as fast as decency allows, and faster than it does. He has been circling that for a year, but my death will make it urgent, because his own house is on fire and he needs my water to put it out. The Hayes fortune is a corpse in a nice suit, Ethan. 3 generations of spending and no generation of earning. Owen has been quietly looting his own family's holdings to keep up appearances, and he has been doing something far worse besides, which you will see when the vault opens, because I have the proof of it and I have been keeping it warm. A grim satisfaction crossed his face. He needs the Sterling money the way a drowning man needs a rope, and he believes, God help his arrogance, that marrying Clara is the rope. He does not understand that Clara controls nothing, that I built it so that even my own daughter cannot touch the true wealth without the door, and the door is on your wrist. He will marry her expecting to inherit a kingdom and discover he has married a locked room. You've thought about this for a long time, I said. I have thought about nothing else for a year, he said simply. It is the last thing I will ever build, and I have built it the way I built everything, which is carefully and cruelly and correctly. He looked at me. Now, the vault. Listen, because I will only be able to say this once, and then I will need you to remember it when I am not here to repeat it. The vault has 2 locks, as I told you. The digital lock is a formality, a matter of codes and biometrics, and I have arranged that lock to open for a specific set of people under a specific set of conditions after my death, because I want them to get that far. I want them to open the first lock. I want them to stand in front of the second lock, having beaten the first, drunk on the certainty that they have won, and then discover that the last barrier between them and everything they have schemed for is a physical key that is not in the building, not in a safe deposit box, not with a lawyer, not anywhere they will ever think to look, because it is inside a watch they saw a man wearing and decided was too cheap to notice. His eyes glittered. The vault manager is a man named Patrick. He has served me for 30 years, and he cannot be bought. I have tested it. I have tried. I offered him a fortune to fail a loyalty test I invented, and he turned me in to my own head of security. When the family assembles to open the vault, Patrick will run the process. He will open the digital lock, and then he will look at them and say the words I have instructed him to say, which are, the final seal is a physical key held externally by an executor of Mr. Sterling's choosing. Without that key, nothing opens. And he will not tell them who the executor is, because he does not know. Only I know. And now you. He let that sit. The shop was very quiet. Somewhere behind me, a dozen clocks ticked slightly out of sync, a soft arrhythmia of time. They will panic, he continued. They will rage. Marcus will threaten Patrick, and it will not work. Owen will try to bribe him, and it will not work. And then, because there is no other path, someone will have to find the executor. They will tear the estate apart looking for a name. And eventually, because I have left exactly one thread for them to pull, exactly one, they will find their way to you. He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a chess player 2 moves from mate. And that is the moment, Ethan. That is the whole point of everything. When they come to you, they will come as beggars wearing the faces of masters. And you will hold in your hand the thing they need most in the world, the thing they laughed at, and you will have complete power over the people who have never once in their lives been powerless. What you do in that moment is entirely yours. I will be dead. I cannot instruct you. I can only tell you what I hope. Tell me, I said. I hope, said Frederick Sterling, that you will make them understand what they threw away before you give it back. Not the money. The money is a footnote. I mean the man. I mean the honest man they treated as garbage. I want my brother to feel his whole life shrink to its true size. I want Owen Hayes exposed for the hollow, rotting thing he is, in public, completely, with no gilding left. And my daughter. His voice changed. The iron went out of it. My daughter I do not want destroyed. I want her woken. There is a letter in the vault, for her, in my hand. When she reads it, she will understand everything I could never bring myself to say to her face. And I need her to have earned the reading of it. I need her to have stood in front of that door, helpless, and to have had to go, on her own 2 feet, to the man she called garbage and ask him for help. Because until she has knelt, Ethan, she will never rise. That is the last gift I know how to give my child. I am going to make her small enough to finally grow. He reached across the counter and gripped my forearm with a hand that shook but still had strength in it. Will you help me give it to her? Even after what she did to you at the gala? Will you help an old man teach his daughter, from beyond the grave, the one thing he failed to teach her while he lived? I looked at that dying man, at the terrible hope in his face, and I thought about a laughing, gap-toothed girl in a photograph, and I thought about my own mother who had died before I could give her anything, and I said, "Yes, I'll help you." He wept then. Frederick Sterling, the old lion of the financial district, put his face in his shaking hands in the back room of a watch shop and wept like the tired old man he was, and I put my hand on his shoulder and led him, one honest man to another, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing left that needed saying. The plan was made. The key was on my wrist. All that remained was for him to die. He died 19 days later. I was not there. That was correct. That was as it should be. I was furniture, and furniture does not attend the deaths of kings. But his lawyer, a sharp, quiet man named David Price, called me within the hour, because David Price was the one other living person Frederick had trusted with a piece of the truth. And David Price's piece was this: that when the time came, a man named Ethan Reed was to be protected and heeded, and that whatever the family said or did, Price was to serve the executor and not the wolves. Frederick had built a 2-man conspiracy of loyalty in a house full of betrayal. And I was one man, and David Price was the other. And over the phone that night, the lawyer's voice was steady, but there was grief under it. Real grief. And I understood that I was not the only person in the world who had loved the old man. "It has begun," Price said. "Marcus has already called an emergency board session for tomorrow morning. He hasn't even waited for the body to be moved. He's downstairs in the man's own study right now, sitting in his chair, making calls." A pause. "Mr. Reed, do you have the item?" "I have it," I said, and I looked down at the watch on my wrist, ticking its layered, secret tick. "Then guard it as if your life depends on it," Price said, "because starting tomorrow, there are going to be very powerful, very frightened people who would do almost anything to take it from you. And they don't know your name yet, but they will." The funeral was 4 days later, and I went, because Price advised it and because some part of me needed to. It was a spectacle, of course. Everything the Ashfords did was a spectacle. 600 people in black, a cathedral, an ocean of white lilies, eulogies delivered by men who had spent years plotting against the deceased and now dabbed at dry eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs. I stood at the back, in the same cheap suit, wearing the same cheap watch, invisible again, and I watched the theater of grief, performed by people who felt none, and in the middle of it all, in the front pew, sat Clara Sterling in black, and she was the only one there whose grief was real, and she was hiding it so hard it was breaking her in half. I want to tell you about that, because it is the first crack I saw in the ice, and it mattered. She did not weep. Of course she did not. She had been trained since childhood that weeping was weakness and weakness was death. She sat perfectly straight, perfectly composed, a study in marble, and she accepted the condolences of 600 liars with a graciousness so controlled it was almost inhuman. But I was watching her hands. That is a thing you learn, fixing watches, fixing anything small and precise. You learn to watch the small parts, because the small parts tell the truth the big ones are hiding. And Clara Sterling's hands, folded in her lap, were white-knuckled, gripping each other so hard the tendons stood out like cables, gripping the way a person grips when the only thing holding them together is the pressure of their own 2 hands. She was not cold. She was a bonfire that had been ordered, for 20 years, to look like ice, and her father, the man who gave that order, was in the box at the front of the cathedral, and she had no idea, none, that he had spent his last year building an elaborate machine for the sole purpose of teaching her she was allowed to burn. Owen sat beside her, and even at the funeral, even in the cathedral, even with the body of the man whose fortune he coveted lying 20 feet away, Owen Hayes could not stop performing. He held Clara's arm with a proprietary tenderness that was entirely for the cameras. He wore an expression of noble, supportive sorrow that he had clearly practiced in a mirror. And once, just once, when he thought no one was looking, I saw him glance at his watch, the new one, the replacement for the one I had poisoned. And I saw him do a small, private calculation. the calculation of a man estimating how many more hours of this he had to endure before he could get to the part he actually wanted, which was the money. Clara did not see it. She was staring at the coffin. But I saw it, and I filed it away, one more. Small, true thing observed by a man everyone had decided was too small to notice. After the service, in the crush of black-clad mourners on the cathedral steps, something happened that I did not plan and could not have planned. Clara Sterling walked past me, and she stopped. And she looked at me. Really looked. The way she had at the gala, but without the audience, without the performance, with something raw and exhausted in her frozen eyes. And for a moment, I thought she recognized me. I thought she was going to say something, and I felt the whole machine of her father's plan tremble on the edge of moving too soon. But she did not recognize me. Not consciously. She looked at me the way you look at a face you cannot place, a man from a dream, and a small line appeared between her brows, and she said quietly, to herself more than to me, "Do I know you?" "No, Miss Sterling," I said. "I'm no one. I'm very sorry for your loss." And I meant it, the second part, completely, and something in my voice must have carried the truth of it, because her eyes filled, just for a second, just once, and then she mastered it with a violence that was terrible to watch, and the marble came back down over her face like a portcullis, and she said, "Thank you," in a voice with nothing in it, and she walked on, past me, down the steps, into the black car, out of my life for exactly 107 more days. I watched the car go, and I thought, there you are. There's the girl in the photograph, buried alive under all that ice, but not dead. Not yet. Your father was right about you. God help us both, he was right. That night, Marcus Sterling was voted acting chairman of the Sterling Group by a margin of a single vote, exactly as his brother had predicted, and he moved into the corner office before the flowers on the grave had wilted. And the war for the vault began in earnest. Marcus's first act as acting chairman was to demand access to the vault. He did it the very next morning, striding into the sub-basement of the Sterling building with 2 lawyers and a security escort and the swaggering certainty of a man who has finally, after 30 years, gotten his hands on the thing he was always owed. And he met Patrick. 30 years in Frederick's service, a small, neat, unremarkable man who had watched 3 generations of Sterling ambition parade through his domain and had opened the door for exactly one of them, ever. Marcus demanded the vault be opened. Patrick, calm as a cup of water, ran the first process. The biometrics, the codes, the elaborate digital theater Frederick had designed to open, precisely as designed, and Marcus watched the first lock disengage with a smile spreading across his soft face. And then Patrick turned to him and said the words. "The final seal is a physical key, sir, held externally by an executor of Mr. Sterling's choosing. Without that key, nothing opens." And Marcus Sterling stopped smiling. What followed, over the next weeks, was the most educational period of my life, because I got to watch, from a safe and invisible distance, exactly what powerful people do when they discover that their power has a wall in front of it they cannot climb, buy, or knock down. They lose their minds. Slowly, expensively, and with tremendous collateral damage, but completely. Marcus's first theory was that Patrick was lying, that there was no external key, that the old man's loyal manager had invented it to stall, that a sufficient application of pressure would produce the truth. So Marcus applied pressure. He threatened Patrick's job, his pension, his reputation. Patrick, who had turned down a fortune from Frederick himself, absorbed the threats of Frederick's inferior brother the way a stone wall absorbs a thrown pebble, and repeated, with maddening serenity, the exact same sentence. Without that key, nothing opens. Marcus had him investigated, hoping to find leverage, a secret, a debt, a mistress, anything. He found a widower who lived alone with a cat and had not so much as a parking ticket in 40 years. Marcus had the vault itself examined by specialists, engineers, a man flown in from another continent who was supposed to be the best in the world at opening things that did not want to be opened. The man spent 2 days with the second lock and then told Marcus, in the tone of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis, that it could not be forced, that any attempt to breach it physically would trigger a destruction protocol that would incinerate the contents, that the only way in was the key, that whoever had designed this had designed it specifically, obsessively, brilliantly, to make certain that it could be opened by exactly one object and no other, and that if that object did not exist anymore, then neither, functionally, did the contents of the vault. Marcus asked what the odds were of reconstructing the key from the lock. The specialist laughed. Not unkindly. He just laughed and packed his tools and flew home. So Marcus's second theory became, find the executor. Somewhere out there was a person holding the key. Find them, and you find the door. And this is where the hunt began, and where I stopped being a spectator and started being the prey. Because Frederick had left one thread for them to pull, and they pulled it. The thread was the guest list. David Price, executing his part of the old man's design with the precision of a surgeon, discovered, after appropriate delay and appropriate reluctance, a note in Frederick's private papers indicating that the executor of certain personal matters had been present at the winter benefit gala. It was a small thing, a scrap, a single line, but it narrowed the universe from everyone alive to 300 names. And Marcus and Owen fell on those 300 names like dogs on a bone. They started at the top, of course, because that is how their minds worked. They assumed the executor would be someone important, a rival financier, a retired judge, a powerful lawyer who was not Price. They spent 2 weeks and an obscene amount of money quietly investigating the wealthiest and most connected guests, looking for the one Frederick had trusted, and they found nothing, because they were looking in exactly the wrong place, because it did not occur to either of them, could not occur to them, that the old man would hand the keys to his kingdom to someone who had been standing near a column drinking water. They looked at the lions and the eagles. They never once looked at the furniture. Meanwhile, Owen accelerated his other project. He proposed to Clara 6 weeks after her father's funeral, and he did it, I later learned, at a restaurant with a photographer conveniently present. And the image of it, the beautiful, grieving heiress and her devoted fiancé, ran in 3 society pages within days. It was a masterpiece of timing. Clara was hollowed out by grief and too proud to show it, adrift in a company that her uncle had seized, surrounded by people she could not trust and did not know she could not trust. And into that void stepped Owen Hayes with a ring the size of a knuckle and a performance of steadfast love, and she said yes. She said yes not because she loved him, I am certain of that now, but because she was drowning, and he was the only hand extended, and she did not have the instrument, the one her father had smashed, to feel that the hand was not trying to save her, but to hold her under. She said yes to a man who was marrying her for a vault he could not open, and neither of them knew the vault could not be opened, and the whole doomed engagement was a race between 2 people to loot a bank that had no door, and it would have been funny if it were not so sad. I heard about the engagement from Price, and then I heard about it again from a source I did not expect. A young woman named Chloe, who worked as a junior assistant in the Sterling Group's operations division, and who had been, before all this, one of the only kind faces I had encountered in that gilded building on the rare occasions Frederick had summoned me there through the side door. Chloe was nobody, in the Sterling scheme of things, a bright young woman from an ordinary family who had clawed her way into an entry-level job through sheer competence and was routinely overlooked by everyone above her, which is to say she was my kind of person, furniture like me. She had, months earlier, shown me simple human decency when no one else in that building would meet my eyes, had gotten me a coffee and pointed me to the right elevator and treated me like a man rather than a delivery. And I had not forgotten it, because I never forget kindness. It is too rare to waste. And now, in the chaos following Frederick's death, Chloe reached out to me, cautiously, through the shop, because something was troubling her and she did not know who else to tell. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, she said, sitting in the chair where a dying old man had once wept, twisting a paper cup in her hands. But you knew Mr. Sterling. You were kind to me once, and everyone up there is acting so strange, and I don't know who's safe anymore. She took a breath. There's money moving. In the accounts I have access to, which isn't much, I'm nobody, but I'm good with numbers, and there are transfers happening that don't make sense. Small ones, structured to stay under the reporting thresholds, routed through vendors that I looked up, and half of them don't have real offices. It started before Mr. Sterling died, but it's gotten much worse since. And the authorizations trace back up toward Mr. Hayes' office, through a chain of people who I think don't understand what they're signing. She looked at me with frightened, honest eyes. I think someone is stealing from the company. A lot. And I think if I say anything to the wrong person, I'll lose my job, or worse. And I don't have a rich family to fall back on. I have rent, and I needed to tell someone who isn't one of them. I looked at this brave, frightened young woman who had come to a watch repairman because she had nowhere else to turn. And I felt the machine of the old man's plan click forward one more tooth, because here, dropping into my lap, was the beginning of the proof of exactly what Frederick had told me was in the vault. Owen Hayes was looting the company. He had been doing it while the old man was alive, and was doing it faster now, draining the Sterling Group to keep his own dying fortune on life support. And this small, overlooked woman had seen the edge of it because she was the kind of person the powerful never think to hide things from. "Chloe," I said carefully, "I want you to do something for me, and I want you to understand that if you don't want to, that's completely all right, and I'll help you either way. I want you to keep those numbers. Don't act on them. Don't report them. Don't tell anyone else. Just quietly keep a record, dates, amounts, the vendor names, everything you can see, and keep it somewhere safe that isn't a company computer. Can you do that?" "Why?" she asked. "Because there's a reckoning coming," I said, "for all of them. And when it comes, the truth is going to matter, and the people who kept the truth safe are going to matter. You came to the right man, I promise you that. Just hold on a little longer, and don't be afraid, and whatever happens, I will not let you go down with them. You have my word." And I meant it, and she saw that I meant it, and something in her shoulders eased, and she nodded, and she became, without either of us quite naming it, the third member of a conspiracy of decent people inside a house of thieves. The old man had started with 2. Now we were 3. But the wolves were getting closer to me. Because after 2 fruitless weeks of investigating the important guests, Marcus and Owen changed their strategy, out of desperation, and started working through the entire guest list, all 300 names, top to bottom, and eventually, inevitably, they reached the bottom. And at the bottom was a name that had no business being there. Ethan Reed. No title, no company, no connection to finance or law or power of any kind. A watch repairman. And attached to that name, in the estate's records, was the one detail that Frederick had left as the final thread. A notation, in the old man's own hand, that Mr. Reed's presence was to be accommodated personally by Mr. Sterling, and that Mr. Reed had, on multiple occasions over the preceding year, been admitted to the estate through the private entrance, off the books, at the chairman's specific instruction. Owen found it first. And Owen, to his credit, because even hollow men can be clever, felt the wrongness of it immediately. Why would Frederick Sterling, who did not waste a second of his time on anyone who could not advance his interests, repeatedly and privately admit a watch repairman to his home? Why would a man that guarded, that strategic, that allergic to sentiment, keep a poor tradesman close and hide it? Owen pulled the thread, and the thread led to my shop. And one gray afternoon, a black car I did not recognize parked across the street from my window and sat there for 3 hours. And I knew, watching it from behind my workbench, that the 100-and-something days were counting down towards something, and that the wolves had finally remembered the furniture. Owen came himself, the next day. That surprised me. I had expected a lawyer, an investigator, a proxy, but Owen Hayes was a man who trusted his own charm above all other weapons. And he came in person, and he came smiling, and he walked into my little shop with its dozen ticking clocks and its smell of oil and brass, and he looked around at my entire life with an expression of such refined pity that I almost admired the artistry of it. "Ethan Reed," he said, "the clock man. We've met, you know, at the reception. You told me my watch was a fake." He smiled wider. "You were right, incidentally. Cost me a great deal of embarrassment to confirm it. I've been meaning to thank you for that. Truly, very few people in my life have ever told me an unwelcome truth. It was almost refreshing." He ran a finger along my counter and examined it for dust, of which there was none, because I keep a clean shop. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because you were, apparently, a friend of my late father-in-law, or something like a friend. He kept you close, and he kept it quiet, and a man like Frederick Sterling doesn't do anything without a reason. So I find myself wondering, Mr. Reed, what a penniless watch repairman was to one of the richest men in the country, and I find myself wondering especially whether he might have given you something, to hold, for safekeeping, something small." His eyes flicked, just once, unable to help themselves, to my wrist, to the watch, and then back to my face, smooth as glass. "Did he, Mr. Reed? Did the old man leave anything with you?" And there it was. The whole war, distilled into a single question, asked with a smile, in a watch shop, by a beautiful, hollow man who did not yet understand that he was standing 3 feet from the one object in the world he needed most, looking directly at it, and dismissing it, because it was cheap, because it was on the wrist of furniture, because men like Owen Hayes have been trained their whole lives to be unable to see value in anything that does not announce its price. I looked at him. I felt the watch tick against my pulse. And I made a decision about how honest to be, which, for a man whose entire worth was his honesty, was its own kind of test. "He left me a great deal, Mr. Hayes," I said quietly, and it was true, every word of it. which is the best way to lie to a man who is listening for lies. He left me the memory of being treated, by a great man, like I was worth something. That's more than most people ever get. As for objects, I spread my hands, taking in the shop, the clocks, the poverty of it. Look around. Does it look like a rich man left me anything I could sell? Owen looked around, and he saw exactly what he had been raised to see. Nothing. A poor man's poor life. A dead end. The disappointment that crossed his face was almost comical. He had come hoping to find the executor, the key, the door, and he had found a sentimental tradesman with a shop full of other people's broken time, and every instinct he owned told him this was a waste of an afternoon. And that, right there, was the exact moment Frederick Sterling won a battle he did not live to see, because his enemy stood in front of his weapon and could not perceive it. No, Owen admitted. No, I suppose it doesn't. He straightened his cuffs. Well, if anything, comes to mind. If you remember any object he might have entrusted to you, documents, a token, a key of any kind, anything at all, there would be a very substantial reward. Life-changing, for a man in your position. My card. He set it on my counter, a rectangle of heavy cream stock that probably cost more than my daily revenue. Think about it, Mr. Reed. Whatever loyalty you feel to a dead man, he can't spend it for you. But I can make sure you never fix another cheap watch as long as you live. He smiled his beautiful, empty smile. Everyone has a price, even honest men. Especially honest men in my experience. They just charge more, because they include the cost of their conscience. And he left, and the little bell over my door rang its thin, tired chime, and I stood there in my shop and looked at his card and thought about how wrong he was. About honest men, about prices, and I picked up the card and dropped it in the bin without another glance, and I went back to my workbench, and I got back to work. But I was not naive. I knew that a man like Owen does not truly let go of a thread just because pulling it did not immediately produce gold. He had marked me now. He would keep me in the corner of his eye. And more dangerous than Owen was Marcus, who was cruder and more frightened, and therefore more likely to do something stupid and violent. So that night, before I closed the shop, I did something I had been putting off. I took the watch off my wrist for the first time in months, and I looked at it. This cheap, heavy secret, this key to a kingdom, and I thought very hard about where a man hides the most valuable object in the world in plain sight. And then I smiled, because the answer was obvious. Because it had been obvious all along. Because the whole genius of Frederick's design was that the safest place for the key was exactly where everyone could see it and no one would ever want it. I put the watch back on my wrist, right there, in the open, on the arm of a man everyone had decided was garbage. Let them search safes. Let them tear apart the estate. Let them offer fortunes and make threats. The key would be sitting on the wrist of the furniture the whole time, ticking away, waiting for the day a desperate woman in mourning would finally have to look at it and understand what she had thrown away. 10 days later, someone broke into my shop to look for it, and they made the mistake of assuming that a man who fixes small things is not prepared to protect them. They came at 2 in the morning, which is the hour amateurs choose because they have seen it in films. There were 2 of them, and they were not professionals. Professionals would have known that a man who spends his life protecting delicate mechanisms tends to protect his own doors with equal care. I had, months before, on Frederick's advice, quietly upgraded the security of my shop far beyond what its humble appearance suggested. Not because I expected to fight anyone. I do not fight. I am not built for it, and I take no pleasure in it. But because the old man had said, the most valuable object in the world is going to live in a shop worth nothing, and the day will come when someone works that out. Do not let the door be the weak point. So the lock they picked opened onto a second door they did not expect, and the second door was wired to a silent alarm that rang not to the police, who I did not entirely trust in a city where the Ashfords owned so much, but to my own phone, and to the phone of David Price, who had insisted on it. I was, as it happened, awake, because I sleep badly and always have, and I was sitting in the dark of my apartment above the shop when my phone lit up. And I did the calm thing, the small parts thing, the thing you learn from a life of precision. I did not panic. I did not rush down swinging. I simply turned on the shop's cameras, which fed to my phone, and I watched 2 men in dark clothes moving through my life with flashlights. And I saw immediately what they were looking for, because they went straight past the register, past anything a normal thief would take, and began pulling open the drawers where a watch repairman keeps watches. They were looking for the key. They knew it was a key. Which meant Owen, or Marcus, had concluded that the old man had left something with me after all, and had decided that if I would not sell it, They would simply take it. The thing they did not know, the thing that makes me smile even now, is that the key was not in my shop at all. It was on my wrist, upstairs, on the arm of the sleeping furniture, exactly where it always was. They could have turned that shop into sawdust and never found it, because you cannot find a thing by searching the place you have already dismissed. So I let them search. I watched them grow frustrated, watched them get careless, watched one of them pocket a genuinely valuable vintage piece out of sheer spite when the key did not materialize. And then, when I had enough footage of their faces and enough of them handling things that would carry their prints, I called David Price, who was also awake, because lawyers who serve dying kings learn to sleep lightly too. 2 men, in the shop, looking for the item, I told him. They won't find it. I have their faces on camera, and I have them on record breaking and entering and committing theft. What do you want to do with that? There was a pause, and then David Price, who I was learning had a cold and beautiful mind, said, "Nothing. Yet." I could hear him smiling. "Let them leave empty-handed. Let them report their failure to whoever sent them. And we will keep the footage, Mr. Reed, the way your friend Chloe is keeping her numbers, because a reckoning is coming, and when it comes, we are going to lay every single thing they did on the table at once, all of it, in front of the people whose opinions they care about, and we are going to bury them under the weight of their own choices." A man like Owen Hayes can survive being poor. He cannot survive being seen, so we let them think they've gotten away with everything, right up until the moment they haven't. A pause. "Are you safe? Do you need to leave?" "I'm safe," I said, watching the 2 men give up and slink out of my shop into the dark. "They're leaving now. They didn't find it. They were never going to find it." I looked down at the watch on my wrist, ticking calmly in the dark. "It's a funny thing, Mr. Price. All these powerful people, tearing the world apart looking for this. And it's just sitting here. It's been here the whole time, right where he told me to keep it, in the last place any of them would ever think to look, because the last place any of them would ever look is at someone like me." "That," said David Price, "was rather the entire point. Good night, Mr. Reed. Sleep if you can. The days are getting shorter now. It won't be long." He was right. It would not be long, because while the wolves were wasting themselves searching shops and threatening loyal old men, the machine Frederick had built was grinding toward its appointed hour, and the next. Great turning of it came with the reading of the will. The decoy will. The one the family thought was real. I was not present for that, of course, but David Price read it, because David Price was the executor of the estate's public, ordinary affairs, the visible executor, the one everyone knew about, while I was the secret one, the one only he and a dead man knew existed. And Price described it to me afterward, with the dry relish of a man who had watched a room full of vultures discover their meal was made of paper. The gathering was in the great library of the Sterling estate, the same room where I had eaten my first nervous dinner with the old man, and it was packed with everyone who believed they were owed something. Marcus, swollen with his acting chairmanship, a scattering of cousins and hangers-on, Owen, seated beside Clara with his hand possessively over hers, and Clara herself, marble and grief, waiting to hear what her father had left her. And David Price, quiet and precise, read out a document that gave them, on its face, everything. The estate, the properties, the named accounts. Marcus received a settlement large enough to gild his ego. The cousins got their scraps. Clara received the family home, a substantial portfolio, and the confirmation of her position within the company. On paper, it was a generous, orderly, unsurprising distribution of a great fortune. And then, near the end, Price read the clause that turned the whole thing to ash in their mouths. "The remainder of my estate," he read, in Frederick's words, "comprising the controlling interest in the Sterling Group and all associated instruments, together with certain personal effects and private papers, is held in trust within the secured facility beneath the Sterling Building, and may be accessed and distributed only through the combined operation of the facility's dual security protocols, the final of which requires a physical key entrusted, at my sole and private discretion, to an executor whose identity is known only to my legal counsel and myself. This executor is charged with releasing the contents according to instructions sealed within the facility. Until the executor acts, the controlling interest remains held in trust and inaccessible to any party. I have chosen this arrangement deliberately, and with full knowledge of the difficulty it will cause. Those who understand why will not need it explained. Those who do not understand why are precisely the reason it exists." David Price told me you could have heard a pin drop on that library carpet. And then he said, the room detonated. Because they understood, all of them, in an instant, what it meant. It meant that everything they had received was the shell, and the meat was locked away. It meant that Marcus's acting chairmanship was, exactly as Frederick had promised, a paper crown, because the controlling shares that would make it real were behind a door he could not open. It meant that Owen had married, or was about to marry, into a fortune he could not touch. And it meant, most cruelly of all, that Clara, the daughter, the blood, the heir, controlled nothing. Nothing at all. Her father had built a wall between her and her inheritance, and had handed the only ladder to a stranger, and had done it, the will all but said outright, because none of them, not one, had proven themselves worthy of being trusted with the truth. "Who is it?" Marcus had roared, on his feet, his soft face purple. "Who is this executor?" "Price, you have to know. I demand you tell me who the old man gave the key to." And David Price, cold and correct, had replied, "I am bound by the terms of my instruction and by the law, Mr. Sterling. The executor's identity is protected. The executor will act in accordance with Mr. Sterling's sealed wishes, in Mr. Sterling's chosen time. There is nothing you can do to compel it. That, I believe, was the intention." The meeting dissolved into chaos and threats and lawyers. And out of that chaos, Price told me, one small moment stood out to him. One thing he made sure to describe to me carefully, because he understood, as I was coming to understand, that this whole story was really about only one person, and it was not me, and it was not the wolves. It was her. In the middle of the uproar, Clara Sterling had not shouted. She had not raged like her uncle or maneuvered like her fiancé. She had sat very still, in the storm of it, and she had asked one question, quietly, and Price happened to be close enough to hear it. And it was not the question the others were asking. The others were asking who has the key and how do we take it. Clara asked something else. She asked, in a voice with a hairline crack running through its marble, "Why didn't he trust me?" And nobody answered her, because nobody in that room cared, because to all of them, her father's contempt was merely an obstacle, and only to her was it a wound. "Why didn't he trust me?" she said again to no one, to the air, to the ghost of the man in the box they had buried. And then Owen's hand tightened over hers, and he murmured something soothing and strategic in her ear, and the marble came back down, and the moment passed. But David Price remembered it, and he told me about it, and when he did, I understood that the old man's terrible, elaborate, cruel, and loving machine was working exactly as designed, because the wall he had built was not there to keep his daughter out. It was there to make her ask, for the first time in her cold life, why she was on the wrong side of it. It was there to make her wonder what she had done, what she had failed to be, that her own dying father would rather hand his kingdom to a stranger than to her. And a person who starts asking that question, honestly, in the dark, at 3 a.m, is a person who has taken the first step back toward the child in the photograph. The engagement began to fracture within days, though Clara did not yet let herself see it. Because Owen, denied the vault, denied the fortune, holding a fiancé who suddenly controlled nothing, began, subtly, to change. The performance slipped. Not all at once. Owen was too practiced for that. But Chloe, watching the money, told me the thefts accelerated sharply after the will was read, as though Owen, realizing the Sterling treasure might be locked away from him forever, had decided to strip whatever he could reach on his way to a possible exit. And Clara, who was not stupid, who had merely been raised without the tools to read the human heart, began to notice small wrongnesses. A coldness in Owen when the cameras were off, an impatience, a way he had started to talk about the vault, about the executor, about the key, that had more hunger in it than any mention of her ever carried. She began, I think, to feel the first cold draft of the truth, that she was not a beloved bride, but a means to a locked door, and that the man who had extended his hand to her in her grief had done it not to lift her out of the water, but to use her as a stepping stone across it. She felt it. She did not yet believe it. Belief would come later, all at once, on a specific, terrible day. But the feeling had begun, and the feeling is where waking up starts. And through all of it, I fixed watches. I want you to understand that. While kingdoms trembled and wills detonated, and men broke into my shop in the dark, I got up every morning and opened my little store and mended the broken time of ordinary people, because that was who I was, and I was not going to stop being it just because I happened to be holding the fate of an empire on my wrist. An old woman came in with her late husband's pocket watch, wanting it to run again so she could hear it tick beside her bed at night, because the silence of her apartment had become unbearable since he passed. And I fixed it for free, and marked it in my books as charity, unrecoverable, and she cried and held my hands, and I thought, this is what Frederick saw. Not some grand nobility, just a man who cannot leave a broken thing broken if he has the power to mend it. That was the whole of my qualification for holding the keys to a kingdom. I could not stop myself from doing right by a lonely widow's pocket watch. And the old man had bet everything, his fortune, his company, his daughter's soul, on the wager that a man like that would also do right by a locked door and a cold heart when the hour came. It was, I think, the truest thing he ever believed, and the hour was almost here. It came, at last, on a gray morning in early spring, 111 days after a beautiful woman in a blood-red gown laughed at my watch in front of 300 people. It came when the family, out of patience, out of options, and increasingly out of money, decided to force the issue, to assemble at the vault with lawyers and specialists and demands, to open the door once and for all by sheer weight of will. They descended into the sub-basement of the Sterling building, Marcus and Owen and their armies of paid men, and Clara with them, because whatever the will said, she was still the blood, and she would not be kept away from her own father's last secret. And they made Patrick run the whole process, the digital lock disengaging exactly as designed, the first great barrier falling, hope surging through the assembled vultures, and then they came at last to the second lock, the physical seal, the analog heart of it, and Patrick turned to them, calm as still water, and said the words the old man had written for this exact moment. The final seal is a physical key, held externally by an executor of Mr. Sterling's choosing. Without that key, nothing opens. And this time, there was no one left to threaten, no thread left to pull, no shop left to search, no name left to chase. This time they had come to the end of every road except one. And Clara Sterling, standing in the cold light of the sub-basement in front of the door to everything her father had ever built, finally understood that the only way through it ran directly through a person, a specific person, an executor she could not find, could not buy, could not force. A person her father had chosen, precisely because that person could not be found, bought, or forced. And into the silence, into her helplessness, a memory surfaced. A memory she had spent 111 days not having. A quiet man near a column at a gala. A cheap watch on a thin, worn strap. Her own voice, laughing, calling it garbage, and her father's shaking hand writing that man's name onto a guest list, and admitting him, again and again, through the private door. She went very pale, and she took out her phone. And with her uncle shouting, and her fiancé calculating, and 30 years of her father's ghost pressing down on her shoulders, Clara Sterling scrolled to a number that David Price, following his instructions, had made certain she would be able to find if she ever, finally, thought to look, and she pressed it. And she lifted the phone to her ear, and in a watch shop across the city, on a gray spring morning, my phone began to ring. I let it ring. I want to be honest about that, because it is the kind of small cruelty a better man might not confess. I was standing at my workbench with a loop in my eye and a movement in pieces in front of me, and my phone lit up on the bench with a number I did not have saved but somehow knew, the way you know a knock you have been waiting a year to hear, and I looked at it, ringing, buzzing, walking itself in a little circle on the wood. And I let it ring. 3 times. 4. I finished setting the balance wheel I was holding, because you do not abandon a delicate operation halfway, even for the collapse of an empire. And I set down my tweezers, and I took the loop out of my eye, and only then, on the 6th ring, 1 ring before it would have gone to voicemail, did I pick it up, because I had waited 111 days. She could wait 6 rings. Read, watch, repair, I said, calm, ordinary, as though it were any Tuesday and she were any customer with any broken thing. There was a silence on the line, and in the silence I could hear the sub-basement, the echo of a large, cold room, the murmur of voices, the electric tension of a dozen people watching one woman make a phone call. And then her voice. And it was not the voice from the gala. The gala voice had been all diamonds and ice, a blade dressed as a woman. This voice was cracked down the middle and trying, with everything she had, not to show it. "Is this," she began, and stopped, and started again. "Is this Ethan Reed?" "It is," I said. "You don't," another pause, a gathering. "You probably don't remember me. We met at the winter benefit, at my father's home. My name is Clara Sterling." "I remember you, Miss Sterling," I said, and I let just enough weight sit on the words. "I remember you. I remember exactly. I remember every syllable." I heard her breath catch, and I knew that she knew that I knew, that the memory of what she had done had risen up between us on the line like a wall, and that she was going to have to climb over it, in front of her shouting uncle and her calculating fiancé and 30 years of her own pride, in order to ask me for what she needed. And I did not help her climb it. That, too, was a small cruelty, and I owned it. Because Frederick had said, "Make them understand what they threw away before you give it back, and understanding is not free. Understanding costs exactly as much as it is worth, and this understanding was going to cost her the hardest currency she had, which was her pride." "Mr. Reed," she said, and I could hear her forcing each word out over the wall. "I'm at my father's, at the Sterling building, and there is a vault, and it requires a key, a physical key, held by an executor, and I have reason to believe, that is, I think that my father might have given it to." She stopped. She could not say it. The whole sentence required her to admit, out loud, that the man she had laughed at, the clock man, the cereal box watch, the furniture, was the person her own father had trusted above her, above everyone, and the admission was too large to fit through the small door of her pride. "Mr. Reed, do you have my father's key?" And here it was, the moment the old man had built his whole last year to create, the moment 300 people had laughed toward without knowing it. I looked down at my wrist, at the watch, at the scuffed steel and the worn strap and the plain dark face ticking its layered secret tick, the only key in the world to everything she had ever wanted and everything she had never known she was about to lose. And I said the words I had been carrying for 111 days. The words that were not really mine, that belonged to a dead man and a laughing girl and a lesson a father was teaching from inside a locked room. "You called it garbage," I said quietly. "You held my wrist in front of 300 people, and you called this watch garbage. You asked me if it came inside a cereal box. I let that sit in the cold air of the sub-basement, let it travel down the line into that room full of powerful people and land in the middle of them like a stone in a still pond. So tell me, Miss Sterling, why would you want garbage?" The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever heard. I could picture it, though I was not there. I could picture her standing in that cold, bright room, phone against her ear, and every face turning to her, and the words she had thrown away 111 days ago coming back to her now with the full weight of what they had cost, and the slow, dawning, catastrophic understanding spreading across the faces of everyone who heard. Marcus and Owen and the lawyers and the specialists, the understanding that the key, the one thing standing between them and everything, had been on the wrist of a man they had all seen, all dismissed, all laughed at, and that this man, this clock man, this furniture, was now on the other end of a telephone holding the entire Sterling group in his hand and asking, softly, why they would want the garbage they had thrown away. When she spoke again, her voice had changed a third time. The scratches had widened, and underneath the cracks, for the first time, there was something I had not heard from her before, something the Gala Clara would have died before revealing. There was humility, small, raw, and real. "You're right," she said. "I said that. I said it to hurt you, because hurting people it was easy, and I was good at it, and I never once thought about the person on the other end of it." A shaking breath. "I don't have any right to ask you for anything. I know that. But I am asking anyway, because I don't have anyone else, and because whatever my father saw in you, he clearly saw something he never saw in me, and I need to understand what that was, and I can't understand it standing in front of a door I can't open." Her voice dropped, almost to nothing, so that I had to press the phone hard to my ear to catch it. "Please, I'm not asking for the money. I don't even care about the money anymore. Isn't that strange? I stood here all morning fighting for it, and now I'm on the phone with you and I realize I don't care. I'm asking because my father chose you over me, and I need to know why, and you're the only person alive who can tell me. Please, Mr. Reed, will you come?" And there it was. Not a demand, not a bribe, not a threat. A question, asked without a floor beneath it, by a woman who had finally run out of every weapon she owned and had nothing left to offer but the truth. And I closed my eyes, in my little shop, surrounded by the ticking of a dozen mended clocks, and I thought about a dying man weeping on my counter, and a gap-toothed girl in a photograph, and a lesson, and a locked room, and I understood that the old man's terrible machine had done its work, that the wall had made her ask, that the asking had cracked the marble, and that behind the marble, exactly where her father swore it would be, something warm and human and long buried was struggling toward the light. "I'll come," I said, "but we do this my way, Miss Sterling, not your uncle's way, not your fiancé's way, mine. Do you understand?" "Yes," she said instantly. "Anything, yes." Then listen carefully, I said. I'm going to hang up this phone, and I'm going to close my shop, and I'm going to come to the Sterling building. And when I get there, I'm going to walk into that sub-basement wearing this watch on my wrist, in plain sight, the same way I wore it at the gala, and I want you to watch the faces of everyone in that room when they realize that the thing they've been tearing the world apart to find has been sitting on the arm of a man they laughed at the whole time. I want them to see it. And then, before I open anything, we are going to have a conversation, all of us, about what is actually inside that vault, and about the people standing around it, and about what your father actually wanted. Because he told me, Miss Sterling. Before he died, your father told me everything. And there are people in that room with you right now who are going to wish, very badly, that this door had stayed shut forever. I paused. One more thing. David Price is going to arrive at the same time I do. He'll have with him some documents and some people you're not expecting. Don't try to stop him. Whatever your uncle says, whatever Owen says, let it happen. Can you do that? I can, she said, and then smaller. Mr. Reed, Owen, my fiancé. When you say there are people in this room who'll wish the door had stayed shut, do you mean... She could not finish it. I mean, I said gently, because I am not a cruel man, whatever small cruelties I permit myself. That you are about to find out what your father knew, and it is going to hurt, and I am sorry for that, truly, because you have already lost your father, and now you are going to lose some illusions you were counting on, and that is a great deal of losing for one spring. But your father did not build all this to destroy you. He built it to free you. You are going to have to trust me on that for a little while longer, until you can see it yourself. Can you trust a man you called garbage? Just for the next hour? There was a long pause, and then Clara Sterling said, in a voice I almost did not recognize, a voice with a child in it, "My father trusted you, so I'll trust you. I don't have anything else left to trust." And she hung up. And I stood in my shop for a moment, holding the silent phone, and then I took off my apron, and I turned the sign on my door to closed, and I looked at the watch on my wrist one last time as just my secret, just mine, before I carried it out into the world to end a war. And then I went to open a door. David Price picked me up in a car that was expensive but not showy, and in the back seat he laid it all out one final time, calm and surgical. The folder of Chloe's numbers, the footage of the break-in, the sealed instructions Frederick had left inside the vault itself that only my key could reach, and beside him, to my surprise, sat two people I had not met. A woman from the Financial Regulatory Authority who owed Frederick Sterling a debt of old integrity and had agreed, quietly, to be present when certain documents came to light, and a man Price introduced only as a former colleague of the old man's, who had spent a decade documenting Marcus Sterling's frauds and had been waiting, patiently, for the day the protection of Frederick's shadow was gone and the truth could finally walk into the light. Price had assembled, in one car, the instruments of a complete reckoning. The old man had built the trap. Price and I were about to spring it. "You're certain about this?" Price asked me as the Sterling building rose up ahead of us, that name in 10-foot steel throwing its long shadow. "Once we walk in there, once you open that door, everything he planned happens all at once, and there's no closing it again. Marcus goes to prison. Owen is ruined completely and publicly. And the girl. She's going to be caught in the blast, Mr. Reed. She's innocent of the worst of it, but she's going to bleed. Frederick knew that. He accepted it. Do you?" I looked at the building. I thought about a cracked voice on a telephone saying, "I'll trust you. I don't have anything else left to trust." And I thought about the thing her father had said, the thing that was the whole point. I want her woken. I am going to make her small enough to finally grow. "She's going to bleed," I agreed, "but she's going to survive it, and she's going to come out the other side as a person instead of a weapon, which is more than her father managed, and more than she ever would have managed if we left that door shut and let her marry Owen Hayes and spend the rest of her life as ice." I settled the watch on my wrist. "Her father didn't build this to be kind, Mr. Price. He built it to be true." "Let's go be true." And the car pulled up in front of the Sterling building, and David Price and I, a lawyer and a clock man, walked in through the front doors this time, not the side entrance, the front, into the marble lobby under the 10-foot name, and we took the elevator down, 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 to the sub-basement, to the cold, bright room, to the door, to the wolves, and to the woman who was about to watch her whole world end and, if her father was right, finally begin. The elevator opened onto a corridor of poured concrete and cold light, and at the end of it was the vault, and gathered in front of the vault was the entire cast of the war Frederick Sterling had waged from beyond the grave. I saw them before they saw me, in that first instant when the doors slid apart, and I catalogued them the way I catalog the parts of a movement, quickly, precisely, each in its place. Marcus, red-faced and swollen, mid-tirade at poor Patrick, jabbing a thick finger. Two lawyers with the trapped expressions of men who have realized the fee is not worth this. The specialist who could not crack the lock, packing his useless tools. Owen Hayes, standing slightly apart, arms crossed, that beautiful face working through calculations, already I could see, beginning to plan his exit from a fortune he could not reach. And Clara. Clara standing closest to the door, phone still in her hand, staring at the elevator, waiting. And when the doors opened and she saw me, saw the clockman in his cheap suit walk out of the elevator with a quiet lawyer at his side, I watched something move across her face that I will never forget as long as I live. It was not relief exactly, and it was not fear. It was recognition. The full, total, devastating recognition of everything at once. The man she had mocked, the key she had called garbage, the father who had chosen him, and the vast, unbridgeable distance between the woman she had been at the gala and the woman standing helpless in this concrete room, now needing that same man to save her. She recognized all of it in a single second, and she went white, and she did not look away. I will give her that. Whatever else Clara Sterling was, she did not look away from the thing she had done. She made herself look at it. That is rarer than you would think, and it is the beginning of everything good that a person can ever become. I walked toward them, unhurried, and the sound of my ordinary shoes on the concrete was the only sound, because one by one they had stopped talking, turned, and seen me. And here is the moment. Here is the moment the old man built his last year to create. The moment worth 111 days of waiting. They looked at me. And then, one by one, their eyes dropped to my wrist, to the watch, to the scuffed steel and the worn strap and the plain, dark face. And I watched the understanding hit each of them in turn, watched it land on Marcus and drain the red from his face to gray, watched it land on the lawyers and make them take an involuntary step back, watched it land, last and hardest, on Owen Hayes, whose beautiful features went through a sequence I would have paid money to photograph. Confusion, then dawning horror, then the specific sick vertigo of a man realizing that he had stood 3 feet from this exact object in a watch shop, had looked directly at it, had asked the man wearing it whether the old man had left him anything, and had walked away because it was cheap, because it was on the wrist of furniture. Owen Hayes understood, in that concrete room, that the thing he had crossed the whole city to find had once been close enough to touch, and that his own contempt, the contempt he had been raised in and never questioned, had blinded him to it completely. I saw the horror of it break over him, and I confess, may God forgive me, that I enjoyed it. You, Marcus breathed, you're the executor, you, a repairman? His voice climbed toward a shriek. My brother gave the key to my company to a nobody who fixes clocks? Watches, mostly, I said mildly, the same thing I had said to his niece at the gala, and I saw Clara's eyes close briefly at the echo, at the memory of her own cruelty played back in my calm, ordinary voice. Clocks are a hobby. I stopped a comfortable distance from them, in the center of the cold room, and I let them look at me, and I let the silence do the work that silence does. My name is Ethan Reed. Your brother, Mr. Sterling, came to my shop 13 months ago, and over the following year he came to know me, and near the end of his life, he entrusted me with this. I raised my wrist, unhurried, and the plain dark watch caught the cold light. The key to this vault. He chose me for a number of reasons, but the main one, he told me, was that I was the only person he had met in 50 years that he was certain could not be bought, charmed, frightened, or fooled. I looked around the room, at each of them. You've now tried all 4. You tried to buy it. Mr. Hayes offered me a life-changing sum in my own shop, and I put his card in the bin. You tried to charm it, that same afternoon, with a smile. You tried to frighten it. You sent men into my shop in the dark to look for it, and I have their faces on camera, and I have exactly what they were looking for, which is nothing, because it was never in the shop. It was on my wrist the entire time, exactly where it is now. And you tried to fool it, tearing apart a guest list, investigating financiers and judges, looking everywhere for the important man your brother must have trusted, and never once, not one of you, looking at the watch on the arm of the poor man you all agreed was beneath your notice. I let that land. Your brother told me you would do all of this, every step of it. He predicted each of you precisely, because he had spent his life watching you, and he built this entire arrangement, this door, this key, this delay, for one purpose: to bring us all, exactly, to this room, on exactly this day, so that certain truths could finally be spoken. So before I open anything, we are going to speak them. You'll open it now, Marcus snarled, taking a heavy step toward me, and I saw two of the paid security men shift their weight, and beside me, I felt David Price go still and ready. You'll open it now, or I'll have you arrested. That key belongs to this family. You have no right. Give it to me. Give it to me now. Mr. Sterling. David Price's voice cut through the room like a scalpel, cold and quiet and absolutely certain. I would advise you, as your late brother's counsel and as an officer of the court, to sit down and be silent. Mr. Reed is under no obligation to open anything, today or ever, and if you lay one finger on him or instruct anyone else to, I have with me a representative of the regulatory authority and a documented record of certain financial activities that will see you in a cell before the sun sets. So, you may stand there and be quiet, or you may leave, but you will not touch the key, and you will not touch the man wearing it. And Marcus Sterling, the great acting chairman, the man who had spent 30 years hungering for this, looked at the lawyer and the woman from the regulatory authority whose presence he only now registered, and the blood drained fully out of his swollen face, and he understood, dimly, that something had gone very wrong with his coup. And he did not sit down, but he did, at last, go silent, which was enough. I turned to Clara, because she was the only one who mattered. She always had been. Miss Sterling, I said, and my voice was gentler now, because the cruelty was for the wolves and not for her. Your father asked me to give you something before I opened the door. Not an object, a truth. He knew he could never say it to your face, because you were raised in a house where truths like this were treated as weakness, and he was the one who raised you that way, and he knew it, and it was the great regret of his life. I took a breath. He didn't lock you out of this vault because he didn't trust you. He locked you out because he loved you, and he had run out of every other way to reach you. He told me sitting in my shop that he had spent 20 years teaching you to be cold, because he thought cold was safe, and that he had watched it work, watched you become invulnerable and unreachable and alone, and that his one remaining wish before he died was to teach you, somehow, the one thing he'd stolen from you: how to tell what things are actually worth, not their price, their worth. I held up my wrist again, the watch. He knew you'd look at this and see garbage. He was counting on it, because he needed you to reach a day when the thing you'd called garbage turned out to be the only thing that could save you, so that you would finally have to reckon with the fact that you could not tell gold from tin. That is what this whole arrangement was. It was a lesson, a cruel one, an elaborate one, the last thing a dying genius ever built, and its entire purpose was to wake his daughter up before it was too late for her to become a person. You asked me on the phone why he chose me over you. He didn't. He chose me for you. I was never your rival, Miss Sterling. I was your father's last gift. I was the teacher he hired with his own death. I've seen a great many things break in my life. Watches, clocks, mechanisms of every kind. And I have learned that there are two ways a thing breaks. It can shatter, or it can finally give way along a seam that has been under strain for years, releasing something that was trapped. What happened to Clara Sterling's face in that concrete room was the second kind. The marble did not shatter, it gave way. Along a seam that had been under pressure for 20 years, since she was 11 and her mother died, and her father started giving her things instead of love. It gave way, and behind it was not weakness, but a person, a whole trapped person, and she put her hand over her mouth and made a sound that was not a sob, that was more terrible than a sob, the sound of someone understanding, all at once, both that they were loved and how much that love had cost. And she looked at me, and she said, through her fingers, in a voice absolutely stripped of ice, "He did all of this. For me. He built all of this. Because I couldn't." She could not finish. She did not have to. "Because you couldn't see," I said gently. "And now you can." That's all he wanted. That's the whole thing. He wanted you to be able to see. And I turned, before the moment could tip into something that could not be born, and I walked to the vault door, to the second lock, the analog heart of it, and I found the mechanism Patrick indicated with a small nod, and I did the thing I had been carrying on my wrist for over a year. I took off the watch. I opened the case back the way I had opened it that first rainy Tuesday, seated the hidden key into the seat that had been machined for it and it alone, and I felt it engage. felt the layered secret tick align with something deep in the door, and with a sound like a great held breath finally released, the last seal of Frederick Sterling's vault disengaged, and the door to everything swung slowly open. And what came out of it ended 2 men's lives and gave 1 woman hers back. The vault was not what any of them expected. I think, in their imaginations, they had pictured gold, jewels, stacks of bearer bonds, the glittering treasure of a lifetime of finance. What they found instead was a room the size of a modest study, lined with orderly steel shelving, and on the shelves were not riches but records. Files, ledgers, sealed folders, a bank of secure drives. And in the center, on a plain table, 3 things arranged with the deliberate care of a man who knew exactly the order in which they should be discovered. A leather portfolio containing the certificates of the controlling shares. A sealed envelope, heavy and cream-colored, addressed in a shaking hand to Clara. And a second, larger box, unmarked, which David Price walked to first, because David Price knew what was in it, because the old man had told him, because this box was the reckoning. Mr. Sterling's true will and the disposition of the controlling interest are in the portfolio, Price said, his voice carrying in the cold room. We will come to those. But Mr. Sterling instructed that this be opened first, and read aloud, in the presence of all parties, before anything else is decided. Because he believed that no one should inherit a single share of this company until everyone in this room understood the truth about how certain people had conducted themselves while his back was turned, or while he was dying. Price opened the box, and he began, methodically, to lay its contents on the table, and to explain each one, and as he did, the temperature in that already cold room seemed to drop toward absolute zero. He started with Marcus. Over the past 11 years, Price said, drawing out folder after folder, Mr. Marcus Sterling diverted funds from 4 subsidiary accounts through a series of shell entities documented here, here, and here, to the total of a sum I will not say aloud because the representative of the regulatory authority beside me has already seen it and gone rather pale. He falsified board minutes. He forged 2 signatures, both authenticated as forgeries by the analysis in this folder. And 18 months ago, when his brother first fell ill, he attempted to have Frederick declared mentally incompetent, using a physician he had privately compensated, whose sworn and now recanted statement is also here. Price looked up at Marcus, who had gone from gray to a colorless, sweating white. Mr. Sterling knew all of it. He gathered it, patiently, for years, and he kept it in this vault, behind a key you could not reach, precisely so that on this day, in front of these witnesses, it could not be buried, bought, or explained away. Your brother did not trust you with his company, Mr. Sterling, because you had spent a decade robbing it. This is not an accusation. It is an evidentiary record, and copies are, as of this morning, already in the hands of the authority. The woman from the regulatory authority stepped forward then, and she said a few quiet words to Marcus Sterling, and I watched 30 years of appetite and resentment collapse into a shaking old man being informed of his rights, and I felt nothing for him, nothing at all, because he had earned every second of it. But it was Owen that the old man had saved the deepest cut for. Because Owen was the one closest to his daughter, the one whose exposure would hurt Clara the most and free her the most. And Frederick had documented Owen Hayes with the thoroughness of a man performing surgery on a tumor lodged next to his child's heart. Price laid out the Hayes file. Mr. Hayes's family fortune, he said, has been insolvent for 6 years. Every appearance of wealth he has maintained in that time has been financed by debt, by the sale of concealed assets, and, most relevantly to this room, over the last 14 months, by the systematic embezzlement of funds from the Sterling Group, which he accessed through his relationship with this family and his engagement to Miss Sterling. The transfers are documented in full, and here Price nodded toward the back of the room, and I turned, and there was Chloe, young Chloe, brave, frightened Chloe from the operations division, whom Price had quietly brought in as well, standing with a folder of her own held against her chest like a shield. A member of the operations staff, Price continued, noticed irregularities months ago, kept a meticulous private record at considerable personal risk, and provided it to Mr. Reed, who provided it to me. Her records corroborate Mr. Sterling's to the decimal. Between them, they establish beyond any doubt that Mr. Hayes has stolen from this company, continuously, since before Mr. Sterling's death, and that he accelerated his thefts sharply the moment he learned the vault might place the fortune beyond his reach. Price's eyes were cold. He did not court Miss Sterling. He laid siege to her. She was never a bride to him. She was an access route. And then Price laid down the last thing, the worst thing, The thing that made even me, who had known it was coming, go still. And this, he said quietly, is a record of communications Mr. Hayes believed were secure, in which he discusses, with a party who has already provided a statement in exchange for leniency, the desirability of Mr. Sterling's death occurring sooner rather than later, and inquires as to whether the timing of a man's heart failure can be, in his words, encouraged. No action was ultimately taken. Mr. Sterling died of the illness that was already killing him. But the intent is documented. The willingness is documented. Mr. Hayes stood beside Miss Sterling at her father's funeral, holding her arm for the cameras, having, some weeks earlier, made inquiries into hastening the very death he was pretending to mourn. The room did not erupt this time. It was too terrible for eruption. It went utterly silent, the silence of people who have just watched a mask peeled off a face and seen what was underneath. And every eye turned to Owen Hayes. And Owen Hayes, cornered, exposed, ruined, did the thing that hollow men do when the performance finally fails completely. He stopped performing. The handsome, supportive grief, the wounded dignity, all of it fell away. And what was left was just the cold, hungry thing that had been wearing Owen Hayes like a suit, and it looked at Clara, and it laughed. A short, ugly laugh with no bottom to it. "Oh, don't look at me like that, Liz," he said, and his voice had changed entirely. All the silk gone, all the charm revealed at last as the paint over the rot. "Like I broke your heart. You don't have one. You're your father's daughter. You're ice all the way down. Everyone knows it. It was half of why you were bearable. I never had to pretend you actually felt anything." He gestured at the vault, at the shares, at the whole cold room. "Yes, I wanted the money. Of course I wanted the money. Look at me. Look at what I am. What did you think I wanted? Your sparkling personality? You laughed at a waiter's watch, and 300 people laughed with you, and you thought that made you a queen. You're not a queen, Clara. You're a locked box with a pretty face, and I was going to be the one to crack you open and empty you out. And it would have worked. It would have worked perfectly. Except your senile father hid the fortune inside a piece of garbage on the wrist of a man we all—" and here he turned his ruined, furious face to me, "a man we all knew was nothing. Nothing. A clockman. I stood in your filthy little shop, and I looked right at it, and it never once occurred to me. Because who in their right mind, would put $500 million inside a $20 watch?" "A man," I said quietly, "who understood exactly how people like you see the world. A man who knew that the safest place to hide something precious is on the arm of someone you've decided is worthless, because you will never, ever look there. Your contempt wasn't just cruel, Mr. Hayes, it was a blind spot. And Frederick Sterling built his entire fortress inside your blind spot, and you walked around it for a year and never saw the walls." I looked at him, this hollow, ruined thing, and I felt the old man's satisfaction move through me like a warm current. "You called it garbage, too. Every one of you did. And that's exactly why none of you could ever have taken it." Owen lunged then, at me, or at the shares, or at nothing, at the wreckage of his own life, I do not know which, because he did not get there. The security men who had been Marcus's were now, at Price's quiet word and the authorities' presence, something else entirely, and they had Owen Hayes before he crossed half the distance. And the last I saw of him in that room, he was being held, spitting, unmasked, screaming about garbage and clockmen and the unfairness of a universe that had let a nobody beat him. And it was not dignified, and it was not noble, and it was exactly, precisely, what he had always been underneath the beautiful suit. The regulatory authority would take him too. His thefts were criminal. His family's fraud was criminal. And the record of his inquiries into Frederick's death, while it would prove difficult to charge, would follow him for the rest of his life, would make him radioactive in every room he had ever wanted to be admired in, would accomplish precisely what the old man intended. Not necessarily prison, though there would be some of that, but the complete and total erasure of Owen Hayes as a person anyone would ever again mistake for someone worth knowing. He was ruined. Seen, at last, completely, and ruined by the seeing. Frederick had been right about that too. A man like Owen could survive being poor. He could not survive being seen. And through all of it, Clara stood very still. She did not scream at Owen. She did not weep for the betrayal, though God knows it was betrayal enough to break anyone. She stood in the wreckage of the life she had been sleepwalking into, and she watched the man she had agreed to marry reveal himself as a thing that had wanted her father dead and her fortune gone, and had never for 1 second seen her as human. And I watched her absorb it, and I watched her not break, and I understood that something in her had already shifted, already hardened in a new and better shape, because the Clara of the gala would have been destroyed by this, and the Clara standing in front of me was, instead, being forged by it. When she finally spoke to Owen, it was not a scream. It was quiet, and it was final, and it was the first entirely clear-sighted thing I ever heard her say. "You're right about one thing," she said to him. "I did laugh at that watch, in front of 300 people. It's the thing I'm most ashamed of in my entire life, and I've done a great many things to be ashamed of." She looked at me then, just for a moment, and then back at Owen. "But you're wrong about the rest. I do have a heart. My father spent 20 years teaching me to hide it, and I learned the lesson too well, and it nearly cost me everything. It nearly handed my whole life to something like you. But it's in there. I can feel it right now, breaking, which is how I know it's real. You never cracked me open, Owen. You couldn't have. There was nothing in you to do it with." She turned away from him, dismissed him, the way you turn from a thing that is finished, and she did not look at him again. Not once. Not while they held him, not while they took him out. And that dismissal was, I think, a more complete destruction than any of the evidence. Because Owen Hayes could survive being ruined, but he could not survive being finished, being turned away from, being decided about and closed like a book. He screamed her name as they took him out. She did not turn around. And then he was gone. And Marcus was gone, and the wolves were gone, and the cold, bright room held only the people who mattered. A lawyer, a regulator, a brave young woman with a folder, an old man's loyal vault keeper, a clockman, and a woman standing in front of her dead father's vault with a sealed letter waiting for her on the table, and her whole false life burned to the ground around her. And, for the first time since she was 11 years old, nothing left to hide behind. She looked at me across that room, and she said, very quietly, "There's a letter. From him. Isn't there?" "There is," I said. "Will you stay?" she asked, and her voice cracked clean through, all the marble gone, just a person now, just a frightened human person. "While I read it? I don't think I can be alone when I read it. And you're the only one here who knew him. The real him. The one who came to your shop. I don't want to read my father's last words to me with strangers watching. But you're not a stranger, are you? You never were. You were the most important person in his life at the end, and I didn't even know you existed. I called you garbage, and you're the only one I want in the room when I read this. Isn't that the strangest thing?" A broken, exhausted, almost laugh. "Will you stay?" And I looked at Frederick Sterling's daughter, standing in the ruins her father had lovingly built to save her, holding her hand out toward the one honest man he'd been able to find. And I thought about a dying man, weeping on my counter, asking me to help him teach his child what things were worth. And I understood that this, right here, was the last turning of his great machine, the final tooth of the clock he had wound before he died. "I'll stay," I said, and I walked to the table, and I picked up the heavy cream envelope with her name on it in his shaking hand, and I put it into hers, and I stayed. She sat down at the plain table in the heart of her father's vault, and she broke the wax seal with hands that were shaking the way his had shaken at the end, and she unfolded the letter, and after a moment, in a voice that started steady and did not stay that way, she read it aloud. Not because she had to, because, I think, she needed a witness, needed the words spoken into the air of the world so they could not be unsaid, and I was the witness she had chosen, the clock man, the last honest man, and so I stood beside her, and I listened to a dead father speak to his daughter for the last time. "My Clara," she read, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have done the one thing I spent my last year praying you would find the strength to do. You have gone to the man I trusted, and you have asked him for help, which means you have admitted that you needed help, which means you have already begun to become someone I was never brave enough to let you be. I am so proud of you. I have never told you that enough. I have never told you that at all, and that is my failure, not yours, and it is the failure I am trying, in the clumsy way of a dying man who only knows how to build machines, to correct now, too late, from the far side of the grave." Her voice caught. She pressed on. "Your mother's death broke me, Clara, though I never let you see it. And in my grief I made a terrible decision, though I did not know at the time that it was a decision. I decided that the way to keep you safe from a world that takes everything was to make you hard enough that nothing could take anything from you. I taught you to be cold. I taught you that feeling was danger, and warmth was weakness, and the only safe posture in life was the closed fist. I taught it to you with my every word, and my every silence, and my every gift given in place of an embrace. And I taught it so well, so thoroughly, that I watched my warm, fierce, laughing little girl disappear year by year behind a wall I was building brick by brick. And I told myself it was protection, and it was not. It was a prison, and I was the jailer, and I have to live, and now die, with the knowledge that the coldness in you that the world fears is not your nature. It is my fingerprints. I made you, and I am so sorry. The regulator had quietly stepped out. Price had drawn back to the doorway. It was, in the end, only the two of us in the small room, and the ghost. I could not fix it while I lived, she read, tears running now, unhidden, falling onto the paper. I tried. Every time I tried to reach the girl under the ice, the wall I built threw my words back at me, because you had learned my lesson too well, and you no longer trusted warmth from anyone, least of all from me, because I was the one who taught you not to. So I did the only thing I know how to do. I built a machine. This machine. The vault, the key, the whole cruel and elaborate arrangement you have just lived through. I built it to bring you to a moment where the thing you had been trained to despise, the humble, the honest, the unglittering, turned out to be the only thing that could save you. I gave the key to the most honest man I have ever met, and I hid it inside the cheapest-looking watch I could commission, and I let you laugh at it, my darling. I know you laughed at it, and it broke my heart to let you, because I knew that one day you would stand in front of a locked door and have to go to that man and reckon with the fact that you could not tell what was precious from what was worthless. Because if you can learn that, Clara, if you can learn to see worth instead of price, then you will never again hand your life to a beautiful, hollow man. You will never again mistake cruelty for strength. You will never again laugh at a good person because their coat is cheap. And you will be free. That is all I have ever wanted for you. Not the company, not the money. Your freedom from the prison I built. This letter is the last brick I am removing from the wall. Please. Walk out through the gap. She could barely read now, but there was more, and she finished it. The company is yours, Clara, but not yet, and not freely, because I love you too much to hand a kingdom to someone the world has taught to be cold, even if I am the world that taught her. The controlling interest is held in trust, and the trustee is Ethan Reed, the clock man, the honest man, for a period of 1 year. For that year, you will run the Sterling Group, but he will hold the shares, and he is instructed to watch, only to watch. And at the end of the year, he alone will decide whether to place the controlling interest into your hands, based on a single question, which is not whether you have made money, because any fool can make money, but whether you have learned to see people. Whether you have become someone worth trusting with the lives that depend on this company. I have chosen him to make that judgment because he is the only person I have ever met whose judgment on the worth of a human being I would trust with my daughter's future. Learn from him, Clara. Not finance. He knows nothing of finance. Learn the other thing. Learn to see. And if at the end of the year he tells me, wherever I am, that my daughter has learned to tell gold from tin, then I will finally rest. I love you. I have always loved you. I was only ever bad at showing it, and it is the great tragedy of my life that I ran out of time to get better. Your father, Frederick. She set the letter down on the table with the exaggerated care of someone whose hands are no longer entirely under their own control. And she put her face in those hands, and she wept. Not the single controlled tear of the funeral. She wept like the wall had come all the way down. Like 20 years of damned grief had finally found the crack her father's letter had opened. And she wept for her mother, and for her father, and for the girl in the photograph, and for the 20 cold years, and for the version of herself that had laughed at a watch and nearly married a monster, and had come within one locked door of spending her whole life as ice. And I did the thing that I am, the only thing I know how to do, the thing that had qualified me for all of this in the first place. I did not offer her strategy or comfort or wisdom. I simply stayed. I put a hand on her shoulder, one honest person to another, the way I had done for her father in my shop, and I let her break. Because some things have to break along the seam before the trapped thing inside them can finally get free. And when she had wept herself out, when she finally lifted her ruined face, she looked at me, and she said the thing that told me her father's machine had worked. That the whole elaborate, cruel, loving contraption had done exactly what he built it to do. I owe you an apology, she said. A real one. Not for the vault, not for needing you. Those aren't things to apologize for. For the gala. For your watch. For laughing at you in front of 300 people because it made me feel powerful to make someone smaller. And for never once, not for 1 second, wondering whether the man I was humiliating had a heart that I was breaking. I did that to you. And you knew, that whole time, you knew what the watch was. You knew you held everything. And you didn't use it to humiliate me back. You let me laugh. And you walked out. And you waited. And when I finally called you, when I finally had to come to you, you didn't crush me. You could have. God knows I'd earned it, you told me. About my father instead. You gave me him back. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. An ungraceful, human, honest gesture I had never once seen from the woman at the gala. I don't know how to be a person who deserves that. I never learned. But I would like to. If the trust means you have to spend the next year watching me anyway, then I would like to actually learn. From you. The other thing, like he said, how to see. A shaky breath. Will you teach me? Will you teach me what my father hired you to teach me? And I looked at Clara Sterling, no longer a glacier in a blood-red gown, just a grieving woman with a wet face and an honest question and her father's last brick lying on the table between us. And I thought about how strange it is, the way a life turns, how a man can fix watches for 31 years in comfortable invisibility and then take a heavy object from a stranger's outstretched hand on a rainy Tuesday and end up here, in a vault, teaching a banker's daughter how to be human because a dying man asked him to. Your father already started teaching you, I said. The last 111 days did more than I ever could. But yes, Miss Sterling. I'll stay for the year, I'll hold the shares, and I'll watch. And when you get something wrong, which you will, I'll tell you. Because that's the one thing I'm actually good at, telling people unwelcome truths in a voice calm enough that they can bear to hear them. I almost smiled. But I'm going to keep fixing watches while I do it. I'm not going to become one of you, in a corner office, in an expensive suit. If you want to learn to see, you're going to have to come to a shop that smells like oil and brass and sit in the chair your father sat in. And you're going to have to learn to be comfortable in a place where nobody knows your name and nobody cares that you're rich. That's where the seeing gets taught. Not up here, down there, where the furniture lives. I picked up the watch from where it lay open on the table, its secret key still seated in the vault door, and with a small, precise motion I withdrew it and closed the case back, and it became again just a cheap-looking watch. Just a humble thing, its great work done. And I fastened it back onto my wrist, in plain sight, where it had always been. Deal? Deal, said Clara Sterling, and for the first time since she was 11 years old, she smiled a smile with nothing performed in it, nothing cold, nothing calculated, just a small, wet, exhausted, real smile. The smile of the girl in the photograph, surfacing at last after 20 years underwater. And somewhere, I like to think, an old lion finally rested. The year that followed was the strangest, and I think, the best of my life, and I want to tell you about it. Not the way the newspapers told it, because the newspapers only knew the loud parts, but the way I lived it, from behind my workbench, with the smell of oil and brass, watching a woman learn to be a person, one small honest lesson at a time. The loud parts you can imagine. Marcus Sterling's frauds, once the vault was open and the evidence in the hands of the regulatory authority, unspooled with the grim momentum of a thing that could not be stopped. He was charged. He hired the best lawyers his settlement could buy, and they told him, as good lawyers do, that his best hope was to plead, because Frederick had built the case against him the way he built everything, completely, and there was no crack in it to work. Marcus Sterling, who had spent 30 years believing he was owed his brother's kingdom, ended by trading a guilty plea for a reduced sentence, and he went away, and the acting chairmanship that he had seized while his brother's grave was fresh lasted, in the end, all of a few weeks. A paper crown on a paper king, exactly as Frederick had promised. I felt nothing for him. I have searched myself honestly, and I feel nothing for him still. Some people spend their whole lives insisting the world robbed them of a greatness they never had, and there is no rescue for a man like that, because you cannot give back a thing that was never taken. Owen Hayes's ruin was quieter and, in its way, more complete. The criminal charges, the embezzlement, the fraud, those took their course, and some of them stuck, and he served time, though less than he deserved, because rich men always serve less than they deserve. But that was not the real punishment, and Frederick had known it would not be. The real punishment was the seeing. Because David Price, following the old man's design, made certain that the full record, all of it, the theft, the fraud, the family insolvency, and most of all, the documented inquiries into hastening Frederick's death, became known in exactly the world Owen Hayes had spent his life trying to be admired by. And that world, which had laughed at my watch alongside him, which had welcomed him into its ballrooms and its boardrooms and its beautiful cold circles, closed against him like water closing over a stone. He was finished. Not poor, not exactly. He clawed together some wreckage, but finished, in the only way that had ever mattered to him, which was that he could no longer walk into a room and be admired, could no longer perform wealth and have it believed, could no longer be Owen Hayes, because everyone now knew what was underneath the beautiful suit, and what was underneath was garbage. He had called my watch garbage. In the end, the whole world called him the same, and it was true. And there is a justice in that so clean and so exact that I can only believe the old man arranged it on purpose, because it was too perfect to be an accident. But those are the loud parts. Here are the quiet ones, the ones that mattered. Chloe, the young woman from operations who had kept her private ledger at the risk of her livelihood, did not lose her job. I want you to know that, because I promised her, in my shop, that I would not let her go down with them, and I keep my promises. When the dust settled and Clara understood what Chloe had done, understood that this overlooked young woman had seen the rot when all the important people missed it and had risked everything to keep the truth safe, Clara did something the old Clara would never have conceived of. She found Chloe, personally, in the operations division, walked down to the unglamorous floor where the furniture worked, and she promoted her, not as a gesture, but because Chloe had demonstrated the one quality Frederick had prized above all others, and his daughter was finally learning to see. She could not be bought, charmed, or frightened into looking away from the truth. Within the year, Chloe was running a division. Within 2, she was on the executive floor. And she never forgot where she came from, and neither did Clara. And the Sterling Group became, slowly, over years, a place where the furniture got looked at, where competence outranked pedigree, where a bright young woman from an ordinary family could rise on the strength of her spine. That is a kind of monument to Frederick Sterling more lasting than any building with his name on it in 10-foot steel. And Clara came to my shop. She came the first week, awkward and out of place in her expensive coat, and she sat in the chair her father had sat in, and she did not know what to do with her hands, and she watched me work, and she asked me questions, and slowly, over weeks and months, she learned the thing her father had hired me to teach, which was not finance, and was not strategy, but was, simply, how to see people. I taught it the only way it can be taught, which is by watching me do it and then doing it herself. An old woman came in with a broken watch she could not afford to fix, and I fixed it for free. And I watched Clara watch me mark it in my books as charity, unrecoverable. And I watched her understand, over time, that this was not weakness, and it was not softness, it was a kind of wealth. She had never been taught to recognize the wealth of a man who cannot leave a broken thing broken. She started, cautiously, to practice it. She started to look at the people around her, the drivers and the assistants and the furniture of her own gilded world, and to actually see them, to learn their names, to notice when they were struggling, to understand that a person's worth is not printed on their coat. It did not come naturally. 20 years of ice does not melt in a season. But she worked at it the way you work at a difficult repair, with patience and with humility and with a willingness to get it wrong and try again. And I watched the girl from the photograph come further and further up out of the deep water, month by month, until one day I realized she had surfaced entirely, that the cold, beautiful stranger from the gala was simply gone, replaced by someone warmer and harder one and infinitely more real. She made amends, too, and this is the part that told me most clearly that the lesson had truly landed, because making amends is the thing the unchanged never do. She found the waiter from the gala, the one who had given me the small human nod as I walked out, and though she could not have known what that nod meant to me, she had come to understand what the whole evening had been, and she found that man, and she apologized to him, and she made sure he was looked after, because he had witnessed her at her worst, and she wanted to be witnessed too, at her attempt to be better. She found others she had wounded over her cold years, and where she could, she set things right, quietly, without cameras, which is the only way amends count. And once, months in, she came into my shop with an expression I had not seen on her before, a kind of resolved dread. And she sat in her father's chair and she said, "I need to say the thing properly. The apology I gave you in the vault, I meant it, but I was in shock. My whole life had just ended, and I don't think I said it as clearly as you deserve. So, Ethan." She had started calling me Ethan somewhere along the way. I had not noticed exactly when. "At my father's gala, I took your wrist without asking, and I held up your watch in front of 300 people, and I called it garbage, and I asked if it came from a cereal box, and I did it for no reason except that hurting you made me feel powerful. And I have never in my life been so wrong about anything, because that watch was the most valuable object in that entire ballroom, and so were you, and I couldn't see either one, because my father had made me blind, and I hadn't yet had the thing happen that would make me see. I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry. And the strange thing, the thing I can't stop thinking about, is that I'm grateful it happened. Because if I had never laughed at your watch, I would never have had to call you. And if I had never had to call you, I would never have gotten my father back, and I would have married Owen, and I would have spent my whole life as the woman who laughs at watches. You saved my life, Ethan. The garbage watch saved my life. Isn't that the strangest, most perfect thing? And she laughed, a real laugh, warm and rueful. And I laughed too, because it was strange, and it was perfect, and it was exactly the kind of joke a dead man who built machines would have appreciated most. There was one more storm before the year was out, and I should tell you about it, because it was the moment I stopped being only a man holding a door and started being a man standing beside her, shoulder to shoulder, in a fight. And because it was the moment I saw, beyond any remaining doubt, exactly who Clara Sterling had become. Owen Hayes, you see, was not in prison yet. The wheels of justice for the wealthy turned slowly, and he was out on bail, awaiting trial, radioactive and ruined, but not yet caged. And a cornered rat with nothing left to lose is more dangerous than a comfortable one, because he no longer has anything to protect. And Owen, with the last of his connections and the last of his malice, decided that if he could not have the Sterling fortune, he would at least burn down the two people who had taken it from him. So he made one final play, and it was, I will grant him, a clever one. The last clever thing that hollow man ever did. He went to the press. Not openly, of course. His name was poison now. He went through intermediaries, through the kind of journalists who print what they are paid to print, and he fed them a story. And the story was this: that the Sterling Group had been stolen. That a mysterious, penniless watch repairman had wormed his way into the confidence of a dying, mentally failing old man, isolated him from his family, manipulated him into signing away control of a great company, and then installed himself as the shadow power behind the grieving, vulnerable heiress. It was a lie built, as the best lies are, on a scaffold of true facts bent into false shapes. Yes, I was a watch repairman. Yes, the old man had trusted me. Yes, I now stood close to his daughter and her company. Twist those three true things just so, and you have a monster, a confidence man, a predator of the dying, a leech on a fortune he had no right to touch. It was, in short, exactly the crime Owen himself had committed, projected outward onto me, which is the oldest trick of the guilty, to accuse your enemy of your own sin. And it worked, for a few days. The story caught. The kind of people who had laughed at my watch at the gala were only too eager to believe that the clock man was a villain, because the alternative, that a genuinely honest poor man had been genuinely trusted by a genuinely great one over all of them, was intolerable to their whole understanding of the world. Better a con artist than an honest tradesman who was simply worth more than they were. So the story spread, and questions were asked, and a faction on the board, the remnants of Marcus's bought loyalists, seized the moment and called for an emergency vote. A vote to challenge the trust, to declare the transfer of control to Clara tainted by my alleged undue influence, to freeze everything and drag it all into years of litigation that would cripple the company and, not incidentally, give the vultures another chance at the carcass. I will tell you honestly that I was afraid. Not for myself. I have been poor my whole life, and a return to it holds no terror for me. I was afraid because I had spent a year watching Clara rebuild herself out of the rubble, and I could not bear to watch a dead man's malice tear it down. Could not bear to see the girl from the photograph shoved back under the water she had fought so hard to surface from. And I said as much to her, the night before the emergency board meeting, sitting in my shop in the dark with the clocks ticking. Maybe I should step back, I said. Disappear. Let them see there's no shadow puppeteer, that the clockman is gone and you're standing on your own. If I'm not here, the story has no villain, and it dies. And Clara Sterling looked at me across the workbench, in the dark, in the brass smell, and she said, "No." Just that at first, flat and hard and certain. The certainty not of ice, but of iron, which is a different thing entirely. Ice shatters, iron holds. No, you are not going to make yourself small again to solve a problem that other people created. You've done that your whole life, and I am not going to let you do it one more time to protect me, because I don't need protecting anymore, Ethan. My father spent his last year and his whole fortune teaching me to stop being someone who needs a wall to hide behind, and I did not learn that lesson just to hide behind you instead. You held the door for me. Now I'm going to walk through it, and I'm going to shut it in Owen Hayes' face myself, in front of everyone, and you are going to stand right beside me while I do it. Not behind me, not in the shadows, beside me, because I am done being ashamed of the best man I know. She stood up. Tomorrow, I'm going to that board meeting, and I'm not going to defend myself. I'm going to defend you. And then, I'm going to end this. And she did. The board meeting was packed, the glass room full to its walls, because a scandal draws a crowd the way blood draws sharks. And the reporters who had printed Owen's lie were there too, invited, which surprised everyone, because who invites the press to their own execution? Clara did. Because she had learned something in a year of sitting in a watch shop learning to see. That the only cure for a lie is the whole truth, delivered in daylight, in front of everyone, with nothing hidden. The Marcus faction made their motion. They read out the accusations, the mysterious watch repairman, the isolated dying man, the stolen empire, and I sat beside Clara and felt the eyes of the room crawl over me, weighing me and finding, most of them, exactly the villain they wanted to find. And then Clara stood up, and she did not rage, and she did not plead. She simply, methodically, with the cold, clean precision she had inherited from her father and the warmth she had recovered despite him, dismantled the entire lie in front of the world. She began with David Price, who laid out the legal record. Every meeting between Frederick and me documented, dated, witnessed. Frederick's mental competence certified by 3 independent physicians in the final year. The same year Marcus had tried and failed to prove him incompetent. The entire architecture of the trust designed, provably, by Frederick alone, months before his death, with a lucidity and foresight that no manipulated man could have managed. Then she brought out Chloe, who stood and told the room, in her plain, honest voice, how a penniless clockman had told her to keep her evidence safe, and had promised he would not let her fall, and had kept that promise, and had asked for nothing in return, ever. Then she brought out Patrick, 30 years of loyalty, who told the room that Frederick Sterling had once offered him a fortune to betray a loyalty test, and that the only other man he had ever met who could not be bought was the man they were calling a con artist. And then, finally, Clara played the room the thing that ended it. A recording, from the vault, of her father's own voice, made in the last month of his life, clear and lucid and unmistakably himself, explaining, for exactly this purpose, exactly why he had chosen Ethan Reed, and exactly what he feared his brother and his daughter's suitor would try to do, and exactly how he had built the trust to stop them, predicting, a year in advance, from beyond the grave, the very smear campaign that was playing out in that room. The old man had seen even this coming. Of course he had. He had seen everything coming. And his voice, dead a year, reached out of the vault and strangled Owen Hayes' last lie in front of the entire board. My father, Clara said into the silence that followed, standing tall in the glass room at the top of his kingdom, did not lose his company to a con man. He gave it, deliberately, brilliantly, to the one honest man he could find, to hold in trust until his cold fool of a daughter learned to be worthy of it. I was the cold fool. Ethan Reed was the honest man. And the person feeding you this filth is a thief and a fraud who once inquired, in writing, into the possibility of hastening my father's death, and who is now, from the wrong end of a criminal trial, trying to burn down the people who stopped him. That is the truth, all of it, in daylight. And anyone at this table who wants to vote to challenge my father's final wishes, after hearing his own voice explain them, is welcome to, and I will remember your name, and so will every shareholder in this company when I tell them what you tried to do. She sat down. The motion died without a second. 2 of Marcus's loyalists resigned within the week, and the story, robbed of its scaffold of twisted truths, collapsed, and the same press that had printed the lie printed, grudgingly, the truth, because the truth was now the more sensational story. The honest clockman, the dying titan's last gift, the reformed heiress who stood up in front of the world and defended the man everyone had scorned. Owen Hayes' final play had not only failed, it had made me a folk hero, the humble tradesman vindicated, and it had made Clara something the city had never seen her as before. Not a glacier, not an heiress, but a woman of towering public integrity. He had tried to bury us, and instead he had planted us. It was the last thing he ever did to us. After that, he was only a name in a court docket, and then not even that. And there was, near the end of the year, a mirror. I have come to believe that life rhymes, that the important moments come back around in altered forms, so that you can measure how far you have traveled. And so it was that, some 10 months after the vault, Clara and I attended a charity event. A glittering thing, not unlike the gala where all of this began. The same kind of marble and chandeliers and 300 important people performing wealth at each other. I did not want to go. I am not built for those rooms, and I never will be. But Clara asked me to, because, she said, there was something she needed to finish, and I trusted her, so I put on a suit, a better one now but still simple, and I wore the watch, the same cheap-looking watch, in plain sight, on my wrist, and we walked in together. And it happened again. Of course it did. Life rhymes. A woman found us, a socialite of exactly the type Clara used to be, sleek and cold and hungry for someone smaller to stand on. And she looked me up and down with that same practiced disgust, and her eyes found my wrist, and she said, loud enough to carry, because she wanted it to, "My God, Clara, is it true what they say? That you married your watch repairman? Look at that thing on his wrist. Darling, I know you've been through a lot, but surely you can afford to buy the poor man a real watch." And the little cluster around her tittered, the same titter, the same cruelty, the same free and easy joy of the comfortable getting to feel superior to someone for nothing. And I felt the old calm settle over me, the calm of a man on solid ground, and I prepared to do what I always do, which is to let it pass, to smile, to say nothing, to be furniture. But I did not have to, because Clara Sterling was not the woman from the gala anymore, and she did the thing that told me, more than any letter, or any vault, or any board meeting, exactly who she had become. She did not laugh along. She did not go cold and cutting, the old weapon. She simply took my wrist, gently, the way she had that evening in the glass room, and she held up the watch, the cheap-looking watch, in front of that whole sneering crowd, the exact gesture that had started everything a year before, but reversed now, turned inside out, transformed. "This watch," Clara said, and her voice carried too, because she had learned that gift from her father, just as I had learned mine, "is the most valuable thing in this room. More valuable than every jewel and every gown and every watch that actually cost what it looks like it cost. Do you want to know why?" The crowd had gone quiet, sensing, the way crowds do, that something was happening they did not understand. Because my father, Frederick Sterling, whom every one of you claims to have admired, spent the last months of his life choosing one person in the entire world he could trust completely, and this is what he chose him with. He gave the key to his entire kingdom to the man wearing this watch, because that man could not be bought, or charmed, or frightened, or fooled, which is more than I can say for anyone else in this room, myself included, once. She looked around at them, at the sleek, cold, hungry faces, and there was no cruelty in her, at all, only a kind of clear, level pity. A year ago I stood in a room like this one, and I held up this same watch, and I called it garbage, and 300 people laughed, and it is the thing I am most ashamed of in my whole life, because I could not tell gold from tin. My father spent everything he had teaching me the difference, and the lesson cost me my pride and my illusions and a man I almost married who turned out to be worth nothing at all under a very expensive surface. So let me save you the tuition since you seem to need it. She lowered my wrist, gently, and she took my hand instead, and she looked at the sneering woman with those fierce, soft eyes. The watch is not garbage, it never was, and the man wearing it is the finest human being I have ever known, and I did not marry up when I married him. I married so far up that it took me losing everything to even see how high he was. Now, was there something else you wanted to say about my husband's watch? There was not. The sleek, cold woman's face had gone through the whole sequence I had watched on Owen's a year before. Amusement, to uncertainty, to a specific, mortified understanding. And she stammered something and retreated, and the crowd that had been ready to laugh at me was instead, quietly, awkwardly, looking at their own expensive wrists and their own expensive lives, and perhaps one or two of them, for just a moment, wondering. And Clara turned to me, in the middle of that marble room, holding my hand, and she smiled the girl from the photograph smile, and she said, quietly, just for me, "There, that's finished. That's the thing I came here to do. I needed to hold up that watch in a room exactly like the one where I got it so wrong, and get it right this time, out loud, in front of everyone. I've been wanting to do that for 10 months. And I looked at her, this woman who had once been a glacier and was now the warmest thing in any room she entered, and I understood that the old man's machine had not just freed his daughter, it had finished its work so completely that she was now, herself, a teacher, holding up a cheap watch in a room full of the blind and daring them to learn to see. Her father would have wept, in a good way this time, the way you weep when a broken thing you loved is finally, fully mended. I did not fall in love with her all at once, and I want to be careful here, because this is not that kind of story, or at least it did not start as that kind of story. It started as an old man's dying wish, and a lesson and a duty. But you cannot spend a year watching a person struggle, honestly and humbly, to become better, watching them fail and try again, watching the ice give way to something warm and brave and hard-won, without coming to admire them. And admiration is a soil in which other things can grow. And she, I think, could not spend a year sitting in a chair in a shop that smelled of oil and brass, being taught to see by the one man who had seen her clearly the whole time, being treated not as an heiress or a glacier or an access route, but simply as a person capable of becoming better, without something growing in her direction too. We did not name it that year. There was a trust to administer, and a company to steady, and a great deal of grief to metabolize. Hers, and in my quieter way, mine. But it was there, growing, the way the best things grow, slowly, in good soil, without anyone forcing it. And near the end of the year, as the day approached when I would have to make the decision her father had charged me with, whether to place the controlling interest of the Sterling Group into the hands of the woman I had spent a year watching, I realized that I had a problem, which was that I was no longer a neutral judge of Clara Sterling, because I had come to care about her, and a man who cares cannot see clearly, and clear sight was the one thing her father had trusted me for. So I did what I always do when I need to see a thing truly. I went back to first principles. I asked myself the question the old man had left me, the only question that mattered, stripped of everything else. Not, do I want this woman to have her father's company? Not, has she made money? Has she impressed the board? Has she played the part? Just this, has she learned to see people? Has she become someone I would trust with the lives that depend on her? Is she, now, at the end of the year, worth trusting? And I already knew the answer. I had known it for months. But I owed it to the old man to be certain, so on the last evening before the trust matured, I closed my shop, and I sat alone with a dozen ticking clocks and the watch on my wrist, and I thought about everything, from the rainy Tuesday to the vault, to the woman in her father's chair learning to mark repairs as charity, and I made my decision. And the next morning, I went to give a kingdom back to the girl from the photograph. The board of the Sterling Group met on a bright spring morning, 1 year to the day since the vault had opened, in the great glass room at the top of the building with the 10-foot name, and I walked into it in my cheap suit and my cheap watch, and I will admit that I enjoyed the moment more than a humble man probably should. Because there were faces around that long table that I recognized, faces that had been at the gala, faces that had laughed, a year ago, when a beautiful woman held up my wrist and called my watch garbage. They had laughed at the furniture, and now the furniture was walking into their boardroom, holding, in a legal trust, the controlling interest of their entire company, about to decide, with a single signature, the fate of all of them. I watched the recognition move around the table, the same recognition I had watched move around the sub-basement a year before. The slow, horrified understanding of people realizing that the man they had dismissed had been holding everything the whole time. I did not gloat. Gloating is for men like Owen, men whose victories are so hollow they need an audience to feel real. I simply let them see me, and let them remember, and let them understand, and that was enough. David Price spoke first, laying out the legal architecture with his surgeon's precision. The trust, its terms, the 1-year period now concluded, the sole discretion vested in the trustee, Ethan Reed, to determine the disposition of the controlling interest. And then he turned to me, and the room turned to me, and Clara, at the far end of the table, looked at me with an expression I will carry to my own grave, because it held everything, a year of it, the grief and the work and the fear and the hope, and underneath all of it, a trust so complete it humbled me, the trust of a person who has handed you the power to destroy them, and is betting their whole future that you are who they have come to believe you are. I stood up, and I spoke, and I kept it short, because I am not a man of speeches, and the truest things do not need many words. A little over a year ago, I said, the man who built this company came into my shop out of the rain and told me I was the most honest person he had met in 50 years. I didn't believe I deserved it then, and I'm not sure I believe it now. But he trusted me with a key and a lesson and a daughter, and he asked me to make one judgment at the end of 1 year, and the judgment was not about profit or performance or any of the things this table usually measures. It was one question. Has Clara Sterling learned to see people? Has she become someone worth trusting with the lives that depend on this company? I looked around the table, at the powerful, at the ones who had laughed. I've spent a year answering that question. I've watched her fail and try again. I've watched her walk down to the operations floor and learn the names of people this table has never noticed. I've watched her promote a young woman with no pedigree and every ounce of integrity over the objections of people in this very room, because she had finally learned that worth is not the same as price. I've watched her make amends to people she wounded, quietly, with no cameras, which is the only way amends count. I've watched a woman that her own father called cold become the warmest and most honest leader I have ever encountered. And I have encountered exactly one other, and he is dead, and he was her father, and she has become everything he hoped and could not teach her while he lived. I reached into my jacket and took out the single document that Price had prepared, the instrument that would move the controlling interest of the Sterling Group out of the trust and into the hands of Frederick's daughter. My judgment is this: Frederick Sterling, wherever you are, you can rest. She learned. She sees. She is worth it. And I signed it, in front of them all, and I slid it down the long table to David Price, and just like that, with a clockman's signature, the kingdom passed to the girl from the photograph. There was a silence, and then, from somewhere down the table, someone began to applaud. And then the room was applauding, and some of it was relief, and some of it was politics, and some of it, I like to think, was genuine. But I did not care about the applause. I was watching Clara, who had put her hand over her mouth again, the way she had in the vault, and was not crying, quite, but was close, and was looking at me down the length of that table with her father's fierce eyes gone soft. And I understood that whatever this was between us, the thing that had been growing quietly in good soil all year, it had just been witnessed by a room full of people, and that neither of us was going to be able to pretend anymore that it was only a trust, and a lesson, and a duty. She found me afterward, when the board had filtered out, in the empty glass room with the city spread out below, and the 10-foot name throwing its shadow the other way now, toward evening. She came and stood beside me at the window, close, and for a while neither of us said anything. Two people who had started as an heiress and her furniture, and had ended as something neither of us had a clean word for. You could have kept it, she said finally, quietly. The company, the trust. He gave you sole discretion. You could have decided I hadn't learned enough, extended it, taken control, done anything you wanted. You held everything, Ethan, for a year. You held my entire life in that watch, again, the way you did at the gala, and again, you didn't use it against me. You gave it back. She turned to look at me. Why? Why are you like this? Who taught you to be like this? Nobody taught me, I said. That's the whole thing, Clara. That's what your father saw. Some people you have to teach to be decent, and some people are just decent. The way some watches just keep good time. No reason. They're just built true. I'm not a good man because someone made me one. I'm a good man because I never learned how to be anything else, and I got lucky enough to live a small enough life that nobody ever made it cost me too much. Your father gave the key to a man who couldn't be bought because I'd never had enough to learn the taste of selling. That's not virtue. That's circumstance. But I'll take the credit anyway, because it's the only thing I've ever had. I looked at her. And I gave it back, because it was yours. It was always yours. I was never anything but the man holding the door until you were ready to walk through it. That's all I ever was. A clockman holding a door. That's not all you were, she said, fierce now. The girl from the photograph fully surfaced, fierce and warm and real. Don't do that. Don't make yourself small. You've been making yourself small your whole life, so that people like the person I used to be would overlook you. And it kept you safe. And it made you the perfect man to hide a key on. And I understand why you did it. But you don't have to do it anymore. Not with me. I see you now. That's the whole point, isn't it? That's what all of this was for. I see you. Her voice dropped. You were the most valuable thing in that entire ballroom, and I called you garbage. And it took losing everything, and calling you on a telephone, and standing in front of a door I couldn't open, to make me understand what I was looking at. And now I understand it. And I am not going to be one more person who overlooks Ethan Reed. She reached out then, and she did the thing she had done at the gala, the thing that had started everything. She took my wrist, gently this time, without an audience, without cruelty, and she turned it so the watch caught the evening light. The same watch, the scuffed steel, the worn strap, the plain dark face. Tell me about the watch, she said softly. The real thing, not the key. The key's gone, its work is done. But you still wear it, every day. Why? I looked down at it, at the humble, secret thing that had carried a kingdom and saved a life and taught a lesson, and now carried nothing but its own quiet, ordinary tick. Because your father gave it to me, I said. Because a lonely, dying man walked into my shop in the rain, And out of everyone in the whole world, out of all his money and all his power, he chose me. And this is what he chose me with. The key's gone, you're right. Now it's just a watch. But it's the watch a great man used to tell a nobody that he mattered. There's no price on that. It's the most valuable thing I own, and it always was, from the very first second. And the beautiful joke of it, the thing that I think your father loved most about his own design, is that it looks like garbage. It looks like exactly the kind of thing a cruel woman would laugh at in front of 300 people. And it was worth more than everything in that room combined, including me. I looked up at her. That's the lesson, Clara. That was always the lesson. The most valuable things in the world are almost never the ones that look valuable. They're quiet. They're humble. They keep good time and they ask for nothing, and they wait, patiently, for someone with eyes clear enough to see what they're actually worth. I let a beat pass. You have those eyes now. He'd be so proud of you. He is so proud of you. I promised him I'd tell you that, whenever you were ready to believe it. I think you're ready. She was crying now, openly, unashamed, the way she could not have a year ago, and she was smiling through it, and she said, "You know what the worst thing I ever said was? On the phone. When you answered. You made me say why I wanted it, why I'd want garbage, and it was the cruelest, most perfect thing anyone has ever said to me. Because it was true. It was exactly true. I had called the most precious thing in my life garbage, and thrown it away. And then I had to call and beg for it back." She laughed, wet and real. "So let me answer you now, properly. A year later." And she looked at me, holding my wrist, holding the watch, holding, I understood, considerably more than the watch. "You asked me why I'd want garbage. Here's why. Because I was wrong. Because it was never garbage. Because it was the most valuable thing in the room, and I was too blind and too broken and too much my father's cold daughter to see it, and I have spent a year learning to see. And now that I can, the thing I want, more than the company, more than the money, more than anything my father locked in that vault, is the garbage I threw away, the honest man I called worthless. You. I want you, Ethan. That's my answer. I want the thing I was too foolish to know the worth of. If you'll let a reformed fool have a second chance at something she should never have laughed at." And I looked at Clara Sterling, at the girl from the photograph fully returned, fierce and warm and clear-eyed and holding my wrist in the evening light in the room at the top of her father's kingdom. And I thought about a rainy Tuesday, and an old man weeping on my counter, and a heavy watch passed from one hand to another, and a whole year of a life turning in ways furniture is not supposed to turn. And I did the thing that I am, the only thing I have ever known how to do, which is to see a true thing clearly and refuse to leave it broken. "You called it garbage," I said one more time, and this time I was smiling, and this time it was gentle, and this time it was ours. But you came back for it anyway. That's all anyone can ever really do, Clara. Learn what things are worth, and come back for them, and hope you're not too late. I turned my wrist in her hat so that instead of her holding it, I was holding hers. You're not too late. And that was the end of the war and the beginning of everything else. I did not move into a corner office. I want you to know that, because it matters, because it was the whole point. I kept my shop. I still keep it. It still smells of oil and brass, and the bell over the door still makes its thin, tired chime that I still mean to replace and never do. And old women still bring me their late husbands' watches so they can hear a tick beside the bed at night. And I still fix them for free and still mark it in my books as charity, unrecoverable. Because I am still, at the bottom of everything, a man who cannot leave a broken thing broken. But now, some evenings, when I close up, there is a woman waiting for me in the chair her father used to sit in, the most powerful woman in the city, who runs an empire by day and comes to a watch shop by night to sit in the quiet and the brass smell and be, for a few hours, not an heiress or a titan or a name in 10-foot steel, but simply a person, learning, still, always, how to see. We were married the following spring, quietly, with no cameras, with David Price as a witness and Chloe as another, and Patrick, the old vault keeper, giving a toast that made everyone weep. There was no gala. Clara said she'd had enough of galas to last a lifetime, and I understood exactly what she meant. Marcus Sterling served his sentence and came out an old broken man and faded into an obscurity he had spent his whole life terrified of. And I have not thought about him in a long time until just now, telling you this. And I find I still feel nothing, which I have decided is its own kind of peace. Owen Hayes was released eventually too, And the last I heard, he had left the country entirely, gone somewhere no one knew the story, to try to be admired again by people who had not yet learned what he was, which is the loneliest sentence I can imagine. A hollow man doomed to keep moving, keep performing, keep fleeing the moment of being truly seen, forever. Clara heard, once, through the old channels, that he had married again, some heiress in some distant city who did not know to check what was under the beautiful suit, and Clara was quiet for a while after that, and then she said, "I hope she has a father who loves her enough to hide a key in a cheap watch." And we left it at that. Because some people learn to see, and some people spend their whole lives blind, and the difference between them, in the end, is not intelligence and not wealth and not even suffering. It is whether, when the moment comes, when you are standing in front of a locked door with the thing you scorned in your hand, you have the courage to admit that you were wrong about what was precious. Clara had that courage. Owen never will. That is the whole of it. That is the only thing that ever really separated them. We visited his grave together, once, in the autumn after the wedding, on a gray afternoon that smelled of rain the way that first Tuesday had. And I have thought since that the weather was his doing somehow. One last small arrangement from a man who arranged everything. The Sterling plot was, of course, grand, marble and iron, and a monument that threw a shadow even in death. But Clara walked past all of that, past the ostentation her father had never actually wanted, to the simple headstone he had specified in the real will, plain granite with only his name and his dates, and beneath them, at his own instruction, 3 words that had made the stonemason ask twice if he had heard correctly. He saw clearly. No titles, no fortune, just the epitaph of a man who had spent his life being able to tell the worth of things and had failed, until the very end, at only one, and had spent that end fixing it. Clara knelt down in the wet grass, in a coat that cost more than the stonemason made in a year, and did not care. And she put her hand flat against the cold granite, and she talked to her father. I stood back, a little way off, because some conversations are not for witnesses, even when a witness is wanted nearby, and I could not hear all of it, and did not try to. But I heard some. I heard her say, "I learned it. You were right. It took everything. It took losing you and losing everything else, but I learned it, and I would not trade the learning back even to have you here. And I think that's how I know it finally took." I heard her say, "I'm sorry it took me so long. I'm sorry you had to build a whole machine to reach me. I'm sorry I was so hard to reach that a machine was the only thing that worked." And I heard her say, at the end, with a small, wet laugh that was more like the girl in the photograph than anything I had yet heard, "I married the watch, Dad. The garbage watch. I married the man you hid the key inside. I hope that's what you were hoping for, you impossible, manipulative, wonderful old man, because I'm fairly certain it was. I'm fairly certain you planned the whole thing down to this. You probably picked out his suit for the wedding from wherever you are. Thank you. For not giving up on me, even when giving up would have been so much easier. Thank you for seeing what I could be back when all I was cold." And she pressed her forehead to the granite for a moment, and then she stood, and she brushed the wet grass from her knees, and she came back to me and took my hand, and we stood together looking at the plain stone and its 3 plain words, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying, because a father had reached his daughter from beyond the grave, and the reaching was complete, and we were the living proof of it, standing hand in hand in the rain. On the way out of the cemetery she stopped, and she looked at me, and she said, "Do you know the thing I keep coming back to? Of everything? It's that he could have just told me. In the letter, he could have just written, 'Clara, do not marry Owen. He is a fraud. And here is the man you should trust. And here is the company. Run it well.' He knew all of it. He could have just handed me the answers. But he didn't, because answers you're handed don't change you. They just sit there. And the next time you're tested, you fail exactly the same way. So instead, he built a door I couldn't open and made me go, on my own 2 feet, humbled, to the man I'd called garbage, and ask. He made me learn it instead of telling it to me. He spent his death teaching me the way you can only teach a child something that actually matters, which is by letting the world do it and standing back and hoping." She squeezed my hand. That's the kind of love I never knew he had. The kind that's willing to let you struggle, because the struggle is the only thing that will save you. I spent my whole life thinking he gave me things because he didn't know how to give me himself. And it turns out the biggest thing he ever gave me was a locked door and a cheap watch and the chance to finally grow. I'll never be able to thank him enough. I'll spend the rest of my life trying, by being the person he built all that to help me become. And I thought, standing there, that Frederick Sterling, who had asked me in my shop to help him teach his daughter the worth of things, had in the end taught them lessons so completely that his daughter now understood it better than I did, better than he had, understood it all the way down to its root, which is that the most valuable things in life are almost never the ones that are handed to you gleaming and easy, but the ones you have to lose and grieve and finally learn to see and go back for. The girl from the photograph had not just come home, she had become the keeper of the whole lesson, and that, I think, was the last tooth of the old man's clock, the final one, the one that let the whole mechanism come, at last, to rest. I think about the old man often. I think about him most on rainy Tuesdays, when the bell over my door chimes, and I half expect still to look up and see a lonely titan dripping on my floor come to change my life. He gave me a great deal, Frederick Sterling. He gave me a purpose I did not know I was missing, and a war I did not know I could win, and a wife I did not know I was waiting for. But the thing I am most grateful for, the thing I turn over in my hands the way I turn over a fine old movement, is that he saw me. In a world that had looked at me my whole life and seen furniture, one dying man looked at a clock repairman and saw the most valuable thing in the room. And he was right. And he built his whole last year on being right. And it cost his daughter everything, and gave her back more. And it took a woman who laughed at a cheap watch and turned her into someone who could finally understand that the watch, and the man wearing it, had been worth more all along than everything she owned. She laughed at my cheap watch in front of 300 people. It was the best thing that ever happened to either of us. Because it meant that one day, she would have to call and ask and come back for the thing she'd thrown away. And learn, at last, in front of a door she could not open, the only lesson that ever really matters. That you cannot tell the worth of a thing or a person by its price. Her father knew that. He spent his life among people who never learned it, and he died trying to teach it to the one person he loved most. And he used a clockman and a cheap watch and a locked vault to do it. And it worked. It worked. The girl from the photograph came home. And the watch that everyone called garbage keeps good time on my wrist to this day, ticking its quiet, ordinary tick, the most valuable thing I own, worth more than a kingdom, and looking, to anyone who does not know how to see, like exactly the kind of thing you'd laugh at. Let them laugh. I know what it's worth. And now, so does she. The end.